say too, if you do have a question relevant to the topic, the chat is great, but if you also want to use the Q&A function, that kind of gives us a running list of questions and make sure we get them all. So just to mention that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Did I forget anything else, you guys?
Don't think so.
I'm just grabbing the data from the poll before I get rid of it, since it's hovering over everybody's screen right now. It's kind of cool. We do have a couple of people logging in from mobile devices. That's good to know. That means I should probably make my fonts bigger. All right. Oh, we've already got something popping up in the questions. Shall I have ArrayCalc open? I think that's a great question. And I'm going to leave this up to you guys. If you have two monitors or a very large monitor where you can keep both of our Zoom window and your ArrayCalc window open, then I think it's totally worthwhile. If you only have one screen, we might be moving kind of quickly. And so it might be better just to watch and then spend some time afterwards. And if questions ever come up, feel free to email support@bbaudio.com and we can answer your questions as they come up later on. Good morning, Dylan. How are you? Shall I switch to my laptop? Nah, it's fine. If you're watching on your phone, it's okay. I just don't want to know what you're doing and where you are in the house while you're watching on your phone. Will these videos be posted later on the internet? Unfortunately, at this point, we are not recording these for release on the internet. And the reason is because our legal department tells us that there are some privacy issues with you guys as the guests in this webinar. So we'll see where that goes in the future, but currently not being released online yet. Great questions. Did I forget anything, you guys? We all good to do this? Sweet. All right, remember to jump in at any time and ask some questions. In the meantime, let's just go ahead and take a look at ArrayCalc here. And today we're going to be focusing primarily on the first 4 tabs: venue, sources, alignment, and the 3D plot. And then at the very end, we're just going to open this up in ArrayCalc for anybody who isn't familiar with seeing that workflow in the past. So first thing we want to talk about here with the venue tab. This is based on a 3D coordinate system. So we have X, Y, and Z. This represents left to right, forward to back, and top to bottom. And everything in our file will be placed around a global point of origin, which is represented by that yellow dot in the middle. That is this space, this point in space that represents 0 in the x-axis, 0 in the y-axis, and 0 in the z-axis. And one of the biggest conversation points that we always have when we talk about the venue tab is where to build our venue in relation to that global point of origin. And this, unfortunately, does not always have a clear answer because it depends on how you want to approach your file. And the thing to keep in mind is that all of the measurements that you get from ArrayCalc, things like the height of your PA and how far upstage and downstage it is, this will all be in reference to that global point of origin. This means that you just want to keep in mind where the global point of origin is, and it probably wants to represent a real place in the venue that you can measure from in order to make your load-in go smoother. Most of the time, when we talk about proscenium stage venues, the global point of origin is going to be downstage center. That's the easiest place to put it. It's the easiest place to measure from. And if you're in a theater, typically you're flying the PA from the stage. And this means you want the height of your global point of origin to be at the stage level, not at the floor level. However, this gets a little bit more complicated when we talk about arenas, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And for the most part, we're adding listening planes in one of our available shapes here, most commonly the quadrangle. And these listening planes are generally representing areas where the audience is. So right now, I've added a quadrangle on the page, and I can move it around, and I can see all of the parameters for this quadrangle located on the left. And this all seems pretty cut and dry, but the #1 question we get, especially since it's a newer version than ArrayCalc, is this concept of different types of listening planes. And there seems to be some confusion out there as to what these do and how they work. So I'm going to describe them really quickly. A listening plane is any object where you want a prediction to occur. You want a heat map to be projected onto this image because we want to see the coverage characteristics. And by default, it is transparent. And the reason is that non-transparent listening planes take up exponentially more CPU. Good morning, Mr. Schmidt. So typically, like in the case of this listening plane, let's say we wanted to make this be the floor, and we wanted to say that this main listening area has a width of, I don't know, 100 feet, a depth of 200 feet, and a width of 100 feet in the back. I can double click anywhere in the black area where there is not an object to zoom this out. And so we have this floor area here. We can colorize it. We can name it as needed. Now, the transparency button, sorry, let me close my window so we're not listening to the neighbor's dog. That might be a little bit better. So by default, it's transparent, and that refers to sonic transparency. And the reason is because we don't need to actually visualize any shadowing effects of what's happening on the far side of this listening plane, because there is nothing past this listening plane. There is nothing below the ground. So we don't really need to worry about making it non-transparent. The only time we want to toggle this transparency button off is for listening planes where we want to observe a shadowing effect on the far side of it. This might include things like balconies, and most commonly just balconies or upper rows of, like maybe the 200 level or the 300 level of an arena. These are areas where we want the listening planes to be non-transparent. And in this case, we're going to leave it the same. We're going to leave it transparent. And we have two other types here. An obstacle is something that is always non-transparent, but an acoustic prediction will not occur on this object. So it's a way of allowing us to visualize shadowing effects without wasting CPU on the object any more than we need to. So in other words, if we have some type of a scenic element or maybe a scoreboard in an arena, we want to see how much shadowing is happening on the far side of that object, but we don't necessarily need to see how much energy is hitting the object. In the case of a scoreboard, you might want to actually leave it as a listening plane that is not transparent so that you can see how much energy is hitting that object, but the option is yours. Now, the third type here is a structure, and a structure has absolutely no influence on our prediction whatsoever. It is just there as a visual guide. And this comes in really handy a lot of times if you want to do things like draw the truss lines. Like if I'm doing a large corporate event and there's a lot of truss throughout this giant ballroom and I have to make sure that my speaker positions line up with a truss location to hang on, I can use this structure type of plane to represent all of these visual elements just to kind of help me get some visual cues from my file, but again, without wasting CPU power on doing the prediction. So I hope that clarifies some questions for anybody here. Now, building these listening planes by hand, by adding them in manually, and by manually entering numeric values, whether it be in feet or meters, is really helpful, especially if you're working off of a PDF file or transcribing from a CAD file. So you already have these measurements, but you're not on site yet. This is a good way for us to be very accurate and be able to get our work done ahead of time without being on site. Now, there are two other ways to measure our venue that really come in handy when we're actually on site. And what this does is it assumes that you have a laser disto, right? So you can measure distance as well as angle just from any location within the venue. And we have these two little helper tools where you take a series of measurements, you add whatever the disto tells you into these numeric fields, and then you hit create plane, and it will generate a listening plane for you. Will basically do the geometry of this venue for you automatically. And there were two helpers here. This one I have highlighted now is the measurements plane tool, and there's also the measurements arena tool. Both of these come in handy for different ways. Measurements plane is for doing a quadrangle shape. This works really well in venues that are kind of a typical forward-facing proscenium theater. So you can use this tool once for the floor, again for the raked part of the floor, a third time for the first balcony, and a fourth time for the second balcony, and it will build all of your elevation data for you automatically. And you'll notice as I click into a field, it highlights in yellow down below which measurement it's reflecting. So it makes it really easy for me to work my way through this very quickly, and it makes sure I put all the data in the right place. Now the second tool here is the measurements arena, which will actually build an entire bowl level. And we can run this tool once for every level in the arena. So if there's a 100 level, a 200 level, and a 300 level, we can run this tool 3 times to give us all 3 of our bowls, and elevation data and curvature and all the rest. Now, typically, even if I've worked this file from a PDF or a CAD ahead of time, and I believe it to be accurate, when I get on site, I'm still using one or both of these planes just to verify some of my measurements. Not the least of which is where my stage is located within the venue, according to, especially in an arena where the stage can be in a slightly different place every day or is in a different place for every show. These are handy tools to help me check a couple of measurements very quickly. Do we have any questions yet?
No questions so far.
Nothing coming in. All right, so here's a quick survey. Press the raise hand button in your Zoom if you feel like you know all of this already. Okay, good. Large percentage of people. That's fantastic. Now, instead, I want to try this the other way. Press the raise hand button if this is new information for you that you're learning about for the first time. Okay, good. So I think we're about a 60-40 split here, and that gives me a good idea of how to kind of pace this as we keep going. So I have a little short presentation here that shows both tools pretty quickly. And I think that this will do a really good job of illustrating it for the people that are new here. And for the people who are more power users, I think this might
Well, I think Nick might have frozen up just a little bit here. Let me message him.
I told him he should have paid that internet bill, but he was going to keep skating on it.
All right, stand by, everybody. 1 second. Let me see if I can get this video up and running. Take over from where Nick was.
We did have a question that someone said, did the dog chew through his data line? That could have been.
Very well could have been. All right.
Well, you got to the venue tab, and that's really the hardest tab in ArrayCalc. So he's thought, you know what? He's gonna drop the mic after that. Do you have the example you're working on your machine? You might could just jump in and
yeah, that's what I'm trying to find. I'm not seeing it in this folder. Let me see.
I guess he really didn't do much. Really, just built a plane. But you guys might have had some sources in there.
No, he was actually about to show a little video that explains the measurement tools. Let's see. That's not it.
Oh, wow, Matt's finding that. I mean, if anybody has any questions about the venue tab in general, about those tools, we can definitely. Oh, hey, look, Nick might be coming back.
Nope, think
and that concludes the webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. What were you guys talking about?
Oh, nothing.
We were trying to find your video so that I could continue.
Yeah, I got it here.
But we did ask if anybody had any questions about the venue, and most people seemed like they had it, so that's a good sign.
That is a good sign. All right, look at this. Back in business. Sorry, guys. We are all at the mercy of our machines, huh? Okay. All right. Where were we? I love it when computers work.
Yeah, I think you were in the process of transitioning to that listening or the video that shows the measurement planes.
This one?
There you go. Yeah, that one.
Okay. All right. So we're going to take a hypothetical venue to work with today. It's going to be this here arena. We have a couple of bleacher seats down near the field level. So it's 4 separate seating planes. And then we're going to treat the rest of this like a single bowl. And for example, today we're going to start with our global point of origin right in the middle of this venue, because this is the best way for the arena measurement tool to operate. And then afterwards, we'll talk about moving the global point of origin once we have our venue in place, so that it is then moved to where our stage location is. So let's dive down in here on field level. There I am, holding my disto. And first, we're going to work with the plane measurements tool here on the first tab in ArrayCalc. And we're going to follow those instructions on how to operate our disto and take a couple of measurements. So I'm standing here on the field level. I've got my kind of karate disto shooting pose happening. And you're going to be able to see the disto just like me. So the first thing I want to do is I want to tell the helper tool where I'm standing with my disto and where the disto is in relation to that global point of origin. And our global point of origin for the moment being is going to be right in the center of the field at field level, which means that as I hold the disto up so I can read it, it's going to be 4.5 feet above the ground. So the first 2 parameters in our plane measurement tool is the X location, which is 0, and the height of the instrument, which is 4.5 feet. And then I'm going to take a series of 2 measurements. First to the front row, and I'm going to get a distance of 72.8 feet at an angle of -3 degrees. Now, notice here, I'm shooting the feet of the audience area, right? I'm shooting the actual ground. And this is because later in ArrayCalc, we're going to specify the listener height, or the height of the ears above this listening plane. But the listening plane itself is going to represent the ground level. So we always want to make sure to shoot where the feet of the front row is. And this seems to be a common misconception out there in the marketplace sometimes. So want to make sure we're all on the same page with that. So I would enter this into my tool, 72.88 feet and -3 degrees. And then I can move on to my second measurement, which will be the last row of this particular listening plane. So I'm shooting just the bleacher area here. And that's going to give me a distance of 103.66 feet at plus 3.6 degrees. Enter this into my plane measurement tool and hit Create Plane. So that same data will be entered in here like this. And I can enter in a width at this point if I chose to, and I would measure the width just by walking out to this listening area and measuring across it. Once the data is entered here, I hit Create Plane, and it will put a quadrangle listening plane into my venue that matches the same geometry as this plane in the real world. Now, we have seating bleachers on the sides as well. So here I am turned to the left, looking at the side, or as we're calling it in this case, the west tier. And my instrument position data has stayed the same because I'm still standing in the same place and I'm still holding the disto 4.5 feet above the ground. And I'm just going to take the same pair of measurements again to the front row, which gives me a distance of 45 feet and an angle of minus 4.9. And then do a second measurement to the back row of this listening plane, which gives me a distance of 75.82 feet and 4.90 degrees, positive 4.90 degrees. And I have some width data here as well.
We had a quick question about that last plane. If that is that to the feet of the rear or the wall last surface? And I think that was just to the back of the first plane that we were building.
Yeah, so typically I'm getting an angle to the feet of the back row and a distance to the back of the back chair. That's to be really, really exact. If you just want to shoot angle and distance to the feet of the back row, that's going to work perfectly well in a large venue like this. I suppose it depends on how OCD you want to be. What we don't want to do is shoot up at the top of the chair or at the head level. We want to make sure that we're still shooting the ground and getting an equivalent distance and angle for that. So then we would enter the data into our measurements plane tool, just like this, and hit the Create Plane button. Now, you will notice that when this pops up in ArrayCalc, not only do we have our first plane, but we also have our second plane, and they're both stacked on top of each other. And this is because every time you hit the Create Plane button, it will always drop the plane off to the right. It doesn't yet have an awareness of the orientation within the venue, which means it's going to take just a little bit of work for us to manually rotate that plane back over to the side. And what we want to do here is have both of these planes represented, and then we're going to use our mirror copy function to symmetrically copy these planes to the other side of the field as well. So we only need to measure basically half of our venue, and then we can copy it over. So for example, I am going to import a venue here that represents all of these measurements already being done. This is our arena measurement ArrayCalc. Oh, right. It's a whole ArrayCalc, not just a venue. Stand by. Didn't we have this file already?
I don't see anything in that particular folder you were looking at, but we do have another one in the arena.
Sorry, guys. Super well prepared here. You know what? I say screw it. Let's just build it manually, huh? Thanks for doing the first webinar with us, you guys. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to enter my data here in the plane measurement tool for the very first venue, the very first listening plane, because I wrote down all of the data. It's 3 degrees and a width of 69.58. And this is going to be 103.65 feet, 3.6 degrees, and a width of 105.90. And then I hit create plane, double click to zoom out, and there is the north bleacher. So that's the first one I measured. And now that it's on the venue, I can say this is called north bleacher. Fantastic. Now I'm going to enter in the data for the second plane. I don't have to change the instrument position because all I'm doing is turning to the left, but the instrument is still in the same position. So I'm going to enter 45 feet minus 4.9 degrees and a width of 139.45. And then for the second measurement, 75.82 and an angle of 4.9 degrees and a width of 155.86. And hit create plane again. So this is what I was talking about before, that both of these are stacked on top of each other because it always places the planes to the right. And with this object selected, I can see the parameters for it here on the left. And you'll notice it popped it in with a distance in the X of 44.8 and a distance in the Y of 0. So for me to move this off to the left is just as simple as copying, pasting, and reversing these two coordinates. So I've now moved the point of origin for this listening plane off to my left. And now if I grab this little floating handle on the side, I can rotate it. Easy enough to reposition that to the left. And of course, I can name this west bleacher. Okay. Now with this selected, I can enable the mirror X to paste this to the other side. And I can do a similar process here from my north bleacher to mirror in the Y. So I've only had to measure 2 of the planes. And assuming that this is a symmetrical venue, as it usually is, I can just mirror it to the other side and then rename stuff as needed. South bleacher and east bleacher. Yeah, let's save this to our desktop called Playtime. All right, great. Now, I have yet to put in a field level, but that's easy enough for me to do now that I have my first listening planes, because simply put, I can just drop in a quadrangle, and I can freehand this in just a quick second. I put a 4 in, maybe I call this field, and I usually make the field green, pretending like it's real grass. And now here on my preview tab, I've got the first level of my venue completed. And I'm leaving all of these as transparent listening planes because there's nothing on the other side of the listening planes that are of concern. So I don't care if sound hypothetically goes through them or not. And I keep in mind that having transparent listening planes helps my predictions run faster, which is my priority for this type of venue. All right, now let's get into the interesting part. Now that we've done the bleachers in the field, we have now the arena measurement tool here to do our main bowl. So I'm going to slip back into presentation mode. Now we're going to be working with this guy. And this is going to have a higher set of measurements required for this to work, but it's still going to be much faster than trying to enter in this complex data any other way. So I'm going to take a series of measurements from the center position. Here I am back in my venue. And my instrument position has a height or a Z of 4.5 feet. And I'm going to take a measurement to the front row of my second seating section. This is going to give me 3.9 degrees and a distance of 103.69 feet. And I'm going to take a measurement to the top. This gives me 12 degrees. And what was that, 166 something? Oh, let me back it up. Oop. Oop. Well, this is going really well. Oh, come on.
166.14 with 12 degrees.
Got it. You're my boy, Blue. Matt, do you have all of these written down?
I'm following along with the presentation.
Right. Copy that. So now I'm going to take some measurements to the midpoint or the elbow of the turn of my venue here. And in this case, I've got a distance of 111.81 feet at 3.6 degrees to the bottom row. And then to the top row, we have 174.52 feet and 11.4 degrees. Then all the way to the side to the left, I'll take these same two measurements again. 75.86 feet and 5.3 degrees. And then again to the back row. 14.4 degrees and 138.96 feet. So now I've taken a series of measurements from the center of the venue, and now it wants just a couple more measurements from off center. This is required for it to work out the algebra here and all the geometry. So my off center measurement position is still at a height of 4.5 feet because I'm holding the disto 4.5 feet in the air. But I'm now taking the measurements from a position of 52.8 feet off center. Right, I'm 52.8 feet from my point of origin because I'm standing now at one end of the field instead of in the middle of the field. And I'm going to take a measurement to the elbow of this curvature right at the front row. And that's going to give me 70.12 feet at an angle of 5.7 degrees. And then I take a measurement to the top or the back row. 131.54 and 15.2 degrees. So now I can enter the data here in my arena measurement tool. And it's up to you if you want to do it like the way I'm doing it right now, where you write down the numbers in a pad of paper and then go walk to catering and fill this in your ArrayCalc file, or if you want to just hold your laptop at the center of the field and enter it in. Your mileage may vary. So here are my measurement tool. For my center measurement position, I have a height of 4.5 feet. And I'm just going to keep transcribing these numbers as I wrote them down. Tabbing through each data entry field. And you'll see as I go from one field to the next, it highlights a different measurement in yellow down below to help me work through this guide. Now I'm going to enter in the measurements for my off-center position, 52.8 feet from center, and holding the instrument at 4.5 feet. I get exactly the same measurements right here. And then, yes, sir.
And just to tag on to that, our buddy Rudd is asking if there's an optimal distance from the P0 point that you want to be off center for that measurement.
Yeah. That's a great question. And as a rule of thumb, I try to go as far as possible from off center within reason. If you are too close to center, it will pop up an error telling you that you are too close to center and the tool can't properly do its job right. So that's a great question, Rudd. In fact, Rudd, do you remember what the amount off center is that's required by chance? I mean, I know I work for Dmv and you don't, but I also know you've been around for a hot minute, so maybe you know the answer off the top of your head. We'll give him a minute to answer, if he has an answer. I'm not sure. Oh, something came in. 57.2 feet. Was it 57? No, it's 52.8 feet. That's the amount off center that I am currently located. I hope that was your question, Rob. All right. So before I hit the create plane button, I can decide if this object, this bowl, or this super elliptic as we call it, is made out of one object, two objects, or four objects. And the reason you might want to split it up is maybe you want to delete or modify an object later. So I'm just going to choose four objects for the sake of illustration, and I'm going to hit create plane. And sure enough, it's built me an upper level bowl out of four separate objects, so I can modify those individually later if I wanted to. And if I switch to my 3D tab up here, or my preview tab, sorry, I can see this in three-dimensional space. And I could continue, rinse and repeat with this arena measurement tool to build a 300 level, or 200 level, a 300 level, 400 level, etc. for every level of bowl that exists. And I'm still going to leave these listening planes as transparent because there's nothing on the back side that I want to evaluate the shadowing of. Now, if I had a bowl that kind of partially obscured some of my seats, that's when I would want to change it to be non-transparent. Rudd says, he can't remember off the top of his head, but I always understood that it had to be 2/3 of the distance to zone 1. And I assume you mean zone 1 being the end zone or the end of the field. And that sounds about right. So that's why I always, when I do my off-center instrument positions here, I go really to the end of the field just to make sure I'm giving this tool all the math that it can work as far as building this listening plane accurately. Okay. Thanks, Rod. It's nice to see you this morning. We have a trader in our midst this morning, you guys. There's somebody here who used to work as an audio department manager at not one, but two different Dmv companies, but now works for another PA manufacturer.
You know who you are.
Yeah, you know, exactly. No, all jokes aside, I'm glad you're here, buddy. Okay, so now we've gone through the necessary evil of dealing with our venue tab. Oh, yeah, sorry, Richie. Richie's telling me he should have converted his software to feet before this, as his on-the-fly transcribing the meters probably isn't working out too well for him. I apologize for that. And in fact, maybe we should consider doing this in meters in the future, or maybe I should do the math for you ahead of time.
Yeah, we've had a few questions relating to that, asking if it's beneficial to work in meters versus feet. You know, obviously here in the US, most things are based off of feet. If you're handing a rigger a rigging plot, it's generally going to be in feet. But in general, yes, meters can be a little bit easier to work with. And in fact, most of the time when I'm on site, I'm using a tape measure that has decimal feet. It's much easier to say, you know, 50.5 feet as a or as opposed to some weird fraction number that you have to then convert. And ArrayCalc is thinking in that same thought process as well.
Yeah, I know. If it were up to me, we would work in meters here too, but then I would get yelled at by the riggers when I gave them dimensions in meters instead of feet. You know, the debate goes on. Maybe right now, while the world is shut down, we could just switch and no one would notice. What do you think, Matt?
I think that's a great idea.
Sure. Yeah, Richie, I hear you. I know. Hey, just so you guys know, you can switch your file back and forth. If you go to project settings, you can switch the units back and forth. So you could be working in feet along with me and then later switch your file back to meters or metric system and it will do the math for you. Yes, feet and inches would be a nice addition, wouldn't that, Roy? That's a good one. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, Red's got a good point. The riggers are going to yell at you either way. So,
yeah, I mean, that's what we pay them to do, is to yell at each other and everyone else, right? Feet and inches. All right, thanks, Roy. I'm going to submit that as a feature request with your name on it. Okay, great. So what else we want to talk about? Oh, I know a topic here. So now that we have our arena with our global point of origin right in the middle, we don't want to have to build our stage and PA and everything off center, because when we add elements of our PA, it automatically drops them right at the point of origin. So let's go ahead and talk about the move origin function down here. And this will allow us to move absolutely everything in the file by an offset amount. So let's say that we're going to add a stage in here somewhere. I'm going to make this red, and I'm going to call it stage. And I'm going to flip it around because I like the front of the stage to be downstage. That's just the way I am. And somehow we've gotten a measurement, probably from a tour rigger or some other production staff member, that's told us where the stage is in relation to our venue. And it might be a measurement off center, which would be pretty handy, or it might be a different measurement, like from the back wall or from the far side of the field, or something bizarre. We don't really always know what they're measuring from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assume that somebody told me that the downstage edge is going to be 60 feet from the first row of these rear bleacher seats. So what I would do here is I would actually draw a quadrangle and use it as a measuring tool. I'm going to enter in a depth of 60 feet, and then I'm going to move it so that that 60 feet starts at the first row of my rear seats. Then I can go back to my stage and position my stage accordingly. So now I can see that my downstage edge is 60 feet from those bleachers. And now that I'm done with that measurement, I can delete this quadrangle because I only needed it as a measurement reference. And now I can see that my global point of origin is offset from my downstage center, but I want the global point of origin to be at downstage. And because I flipped this listing plane around, I have dimensions of this front part of the stage from my global point of origin right here. 12.63 feet from the global point of origin, which means I can copy this number, Apple C, and paste it over here, Apple P. So now I can move everything in the file 12.63 feet backwards. And as soon as I click this Move Origin button, we now see my global point of origin is here at my downstage center, and everything in the file has been moved to track this. And I'm going to leave my global point of origin right at floor level, not at stage level, because in an arena, we almost always fly the PA from the floor, right? But maybe my stage is up in the air. Let's say it's an 8-foot stage. Great. And this way, any measurements I get from my PA as far as height will be from the floor, which is presumably what I'm measuring from. At least that's true in most arena situations. All right, I'm going to save my file. What else do we want to talk about here?
Nick, can I bring up a question?
Yeah.
Or something that gets asked to me is you did specify when using the measurements plane tool, you did specify to try to hit the floor. But there are some examples or some times where you get in and you can't even see the floor because it's all chairs. Probably not so much an arena, but maybe a small amphitheater or something like that. Can you talk about using maybe the listener height to kind of cheat that based on what you have to do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point, Zach. So let's say, as a hypothetical example, let's see, which slide do I want to use? I want to use this one. So we've taken a step back here and we're looking at shooting the first level of the bowl. And maybe the first row is easy to shoot, even if there's a wall there, because we can just shoot the front of that wall at the bottom of the wall. But let's say all of these seats actually have seat backs on them, which means once we try to actually shoot the back row, we can't actually shoot the feet because where a person's feet is being blocked by the seat backs in front of them. Now, what I do in this case is I take two measurements and I use the angle from one measurement and the distance from another measurement. So what I'll do is I will shoot the seat back of the second to rear row to point it at where the rear row's feet would be, and I'll use that to take angle. But then, because the distance is a little bit slightly off, I will tilt the disto up slightly and hit the seat back of the very back row and get distance from that. So that's one possible workaround here. The other method is that you could shoot the whole listening plane hitting only seat backs and then make sure that in ArrayCalc, once it pops out the bowl, you change the listening height to be approximately 1 feet above the seat backs. So in that case, the ground level represented in your venue is not correct, but the meaningful part of our data, which is the listening height, is still correct because you've compensated for the offset in the listener height field. Now, this is totally effective, but what I don't like about it is if I take this file, this venue file, and I decide to send it to a friend who maybe is coming into this venue after I did, I probably won't remember to communicate to them that this is what I did. And they might see my listening height as 1 feet and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm changing it to a regular 3.5 foot listening height. And now their file is incorrect. And they didn't know it because I used a little bit of a hack to get there. So I'm not saying you shouldn't use the hack of just shooting seat backs, but keep in mind that, you know, it's only really working for your show that day. And if you want to share this file in the future, it may bring up some issues. Do you think that covers it, Zach? What do you think?
Sure.
We had a quick question about building planes here, and if there's any way to snap adjacent planes together.
Ah, the old snap tool. There is a way to do this, and I'm going to remember how to do it because honestly, I never actually used it. So I've entered in a quadrangle listening plane here, and maybe I know that this is some bleachers up at the top of this bowl. And what I do is I grab the object so that I'm freehand moving it. Will it work on a bowl? It's a good question, actually. There we go. So once I'm moving it on a Mac computer, I hold down the Option key, and when I get close to another object, it will snap to it. And in this case,
so it's going to be more of a point-to-point snap,
right,
as opposed to a plane, like side of the plane snap.
Yeah, because these two objects both have a corner point indicated by the little blue dot. And this object has a corner point indicated by this orange dot. That means as soon as I get close, those dots will snap together. And in this case, they did not snap in the vertical plane, but they did snap in the X and Y here. Now, I just want to try an experiment. If I move this way and try the trick, yeah, it's still snapping to the bowl and not to my bleachers. Yeah. So I think you're starting to see why I don't use a snapping tool all that often. Matt and Zach, do you guys use it?
I mean, not that often. Maybe with more simple venues, if it's just made up of quadrangles and things like that. But a lot of times what I'm doing is actually looking at the coordinates. Once you've selected a plane, I'm looking at the XY coordinates down in the bottom left-hand corner and typing those values into my new plane.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Finlay, there is not a stretch to snap tool, although I think that's a great feature request. That one's getting a feature request with your name on it, my friend. Finlay also asked, in that situation, I shoot the stairs in the seating area, shoot the step that corresponds to that seating level, if that makes sense. Yeah, so it's really handy if in your venue, like this hypothetical venue here, you could just shoot the aisleways instead of the actual seats. As long as the aisleway has the same distance and angle as a seating plane, which in this case, both of those aisleways do. So I think that should work beautifully. That's an excellent point. Just because it says you're shooting it on center doesn't mean that you can't fake it a little bit and shoot it slightly off center. The computer will not be the wiser as long as you're smart about it. Yeah, good point, Finlay. Zach and Matt, and to the rest of you, anything else we should talk about here? Or should we get into looking at sources and alignment and kind of the more interesting stuff, or what I think is more interesting stuff?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think if we don't have any more questions, I guess we do have one from Valerie. I don't know if you answered that one about how to correctly specify the midpoint on a real venue.
So I assume what you're talking about, Valerie, is the position off center of the arena measurement tool. Oh, the midpoint, meaning where, I see what you mean. Where within the elbow of this turn do you want to pick? Yeah, and that's a really good question. And it's not always super simple. So in this case, I would make the midpoint be right here. It is the point at which the apex of this turn is kind of at its midpoint right there. And in the case of this venue, this arena bowl has a nice smooth transition, so it makes it a little bit more obvious to pick a midpoint of this curvature. Sometimes the venue might look a little bit more like, see, I change the curvature here of the inner part. So in this point now, the midpoint is a little bit less clear, just slightly so. So in this case, it begins to curve here and it stops curving here. So I would take the middle of that curvature section, something like that. And I think that's the idea, right? So if we took a quadrangle and we positioned it to represent where the curve starts and ends, we would want to be right in the middle of that curvature. I think that's a really good question, yeah.
And I think it's important to note here that there's no one right way to do this. There's a couple different ways to do this. So obviously you could go through the arena measurement tool and have it build all this for you, or we could do like we did with the lower bowl and create quadrangles that go up and then go back into our file using the arc segment or the superelliptic tool to basically fill in those corners. Because the real meat of our data is going to be in those quadrangles. For the most part, unless you've got PA specifically pointing at those corners, you know, that's going to be more of a visual thing.
Yeah, in fact, I love it. Let's talk about that for a second. Wait, first, before I back up, back on Valerie's question. Whatever we pick as the midpoint, I want to make sure that I've done exactly the same place here when I take the measurements from center, and down here when I take the measurements from off center. I want to make sure I'm firing to the same midpoint. Even if I've picked a midpoint that maybe isn't exactly the midpoint of that curvature, I just want to make sure that both sets of these measurements happen to the same location. I think that's a really important point. Now, yeah, anonymous attendee said, or just import the CAD via SketchUp. Yes, of course, that is an option too. That is assuming that your production department gets you all the files ahead of time. So let's say, instead of using the measurements arena tool, you wanted to measure the bowl using the plane measurements tool. This is what Matt was talking about. So we used our plane measurement tool to get angles of this first level of the bowl, and it plopped out a listening plane that maybe looks something like this. And then we turned to the side and did another one, and it pointed out a plane that, I don't know, like something like this-ish. And then we could use our same trick as before by just changing these values and moving it to the side. Oops. And then rotating the plane. Now, I could drop in a super elliptic and actually conform it, especially when it's on center, because my global point of origin would still be in the middle. I can conform the super elliptic to match those quadrangles. And it's always a little bit of hunt and poke here to figure out how to do this best. Let's see here. Oh, and then ArrayCalc froze or dumped out. Sorry, guys. I'm on a roll today with my computer.
Yeah, I think Nick makes a good point about using reference planes. You know, I do that quite often. So, you know, don't be afraid to use reference planes to map out some of these things that might be easier to map out in a quadrangle, and then go back and superimpose a super elliptic or an arc segment over the top of that to make it look the way you want it to look.
Yeah. And just to be clear, yes, we do make a plugin for SketchUp. So any file type that SketchUp can import, such as CAD, DWG files, you can export parts of that drawing to an ArrayCalc venue file, which can then be imported here. Now, with that being said, I just want to be clear that sometimes it'll take a little bit of doctoring within your SketchUp file to simplify things for the sake of ArrayCalc. For example, if it's a very detailed CAD drawing that includes screws for every chair, that file will very quickly require 100,000 different simple objects to replicate the curvature of every chair and the curvature of every thread within the screw. So sometimes it's an issue of kind of parting out your SketchUp file to simplify things for what you want to export into ArrayCalc. Ah, we've got a trader asking a question. Is this the place to discuss the runway method for AP settings, or is that maybe more of an AP discussion for another webinar? I think that we should leave that as a different topic. What do you think, Matt? Zach?
Yeah, I think that's. I think have we touched on this in any of our other webinars that we've done so far?
We have not, and here's what I'm going to do. Let's put a pin in this. Can you make a note, Matt, that we're going to come back to this, because I want to talk about this after we've gotten to evaluating array processing and time alignment.
Sure.
Because all of these things are related, but that's a good question, Chris. Let's see, Christian asked, will it be a future option to create venue element groups. If I have more than 40 elements, I can easily put them in a group and make the element easier to work with. Well, it's funny that you should mention that, Christian, because right now I have 4 different objects of this bowl here on my arena. And sure enough, if I multi-select these, I can enable join split. So now all 4 of those objects are one group that I can modify together. So maybe that was the feature you were looking for. Interesting, but I like it. So I answered that one live. Good point. We got that one. Chris, got it, thanks. All right, beautiful. These are some good questions. I like this group. Okay. I'm going to open another example here because we have a fully completed and more detailed arena here. Joshua asks, is it possible to export part of a project? For example, a structure that a friend has had in a project that I need in mine. The short answer is yes. We can always import and export the venue data. However, this will not combine what has been imported to what you've already done. It will overwrite everything within your venue file. So I think that that's actually a really good feature request, that we make it possible to import venue data into an existing venue. I've always wanted that. I'm so glad you brought it up.
But I will say one kind of workaround on that is that you are able to have multiple instances of ArrayCalc open. So oftentimes when I'm comparing and contrasting or adding specific elements from one file to another, you can have multiple instances of ArrayCalc open to be able to go back and forth. And this is also a great tool to try out different methods, maybe different PA configurations as well, and to be able to run those simulations side by side and see the differences as opposed to opening up a brand new file.
Yep. I do frequently have multiple instances of multiple venue configurations open at once, and then that way I can A/B stuff as needed. Is there a way you can share this venue so I could try to copy and do as you do? You know what? In fact, let's do this. Let me stop the share. And I think I could just drop this file into the chat, can't I? That's a great idea. Sample file, ArrayCalc. If I take this, post it here to everyone. Will this work? Sorry, guys. I don't think I can share a file in the chat when we do Zoom webinar, only in Zoom meetings. Sorry, guys, you're stuck watching for now. I think that's a good note for us for the future. All right, so I have a completed and more detailed arena file here. And this is where we're going to start talking about really making decisions for our PA within the venue, array processing, alignment, etc. And one thing that we're going to talk about now that we have a PA in place is a utilization of what we call ghost planes. So in this venue, there is a gap between the 100 level in blue and the 200 level in this pinkish purple color, where there are not actually seats, but what we've done is we've added listening planes in between. And the reason we've done this is because we want our PA when we use array processing, which we're going to talk about today, to always have a target to see. And so we have this white ghost plane here. I tend to make the ghost planes white because I think ghosts are white, right? And this indicates that it's a fake venue element, but it still gives these middle speakers of the array something to think that it's hitting. So not only did we do that between the blue and pink, but we ringed the top of this PA, or the top of this arena with ghost planes as well. And here's why. This is the #1 thing that always gets me when I watch someone work on their arena design. Let me come in here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make all of these ghost planes not visible, so that when we look here at our mains, what we could say quite easily is, I want this overall frame angle to be turned so that it hits the top row of my 200 level right here. And this makes a lot of sense when we look at this in a cut view, which is basically just 2 dimensions. But as soon as we go to our 3D plot and start mapping out some coverage, we can see pretty quickly that we're starting to miss a whole lot of seats off to the side here. Because even though we're hitting the right elevations on center, we're cutting off a slice of the audience over here. And in an arena like this, this represents a good 1,000 people on this side and 1,000 people on the other side, which are going to be really upset. And the only way to fix this is to have the PA overshoot. We actually have to tilt this PA up so that when we recalculate, we can see better and more consistent coverage here on the side. And that means, now that we've overshot, we have the PA here hitting nothing. And with array processing, if it sees boxes that don't have a target, it's essentially not using those boxes anymore. But of course, we want those top boxes to be used because they're so important to covering off to the side over here. So this is another reason why we get into ghost planes. Now, if you're not using array processing, this is not too much of a concern. But in today's case, it really is. We want to make sure, let's see here, I'm actually going to modify these ghost planes slightly. We want to make sure that our PA sees a target. So I modified a plane, then I'm copying it over to make sure that my file is symmetrical. I'm going to make my press box just a little bit taller to make sure I get some good height here for a target for this PA to listen to. So now I can see that my box is tilted up a little bit higher, the top box is here, but I'm still going to get good coverage off to the sides, especially when I enable array processing. So for our example system here, we have some KSL mains. We have some KSL sides, which you'll notice are turned very far off stage compared to a traditional PA. For the sake of our playtime, we have some flown subs, which is not required with an SL series PA, but something fun to play with. Then we have some front fills down on the ground, some Y10Ps, or V10Ps in this case, turned on their side, and also some SL subs lining in front of the stage, just like that. So this is going to give us an opportunity to talk about array processing, alignment, and all the rest. And first thing I want to do is talk about alignment. So there's a reason why these tabs are in order here. Because we need a venue before we evaluate the efficacy of our sources. And then before our 3D plot is accurate, we need stuff to be properly aligned because this 3D plot does take into account alignment of sources, at least for the low frequencies. So it's very important. Let's see here. We got a couple of questions. Thiago asks, is there a way to export an ArrayCalc venue into Sketchup? And unfortunately, there is not. Sorry. But I think that's another interesting feature request. This is a feature request group, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we're getting some good ones here.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, as you get to the next couple of questions, we have some good ones about ghost planes.
It would be nice if there was a function to connect planes together for generic ghost planes if you didn't want to add them for a specific reason. Yeah, like an auto connect feature. Let me make a note here. I'm gonna have to think about that because what you're saying to me makes perfect sense, but I can just foresee a very difficult conversation with our software team. So I need to kind of formulate that better, but I like it.
Yeah, and then Joshua basically is just asking the same thing. Is there a way to fill in these ghost planes without having to manually put in all the measurements?
Yeah, good questions. Unfortunately, there was not yet. Then we have a little bit of clarification from Christian regarding the group elements. What I meant about this group element in venue tab is, for example, with the current arena example, could be nice to have your 80 venue elements. You could group all the ghost planes, for example. You mean more, I think, let's see here, like in this list, you could categorize them. So maybe there was like a folder view, and you could show or unshow an entire group of objects without having to multi-select them like that. So I think that is interesting. This is great. I'm learning more from you guys than the other way around. Okay. What else we got here? Yep. Christian, absolutely. Thank you. Yep. Good clarification, Red. Thanks. Oh, you're right, anonymous attendee. You can export to Sketchup. But what you can export is the sources. So here in our sources, we could say export to, and we can export as a DXF of either the selected source of our entire PA, and import that in Vectorworks or AutoCAD or SketchUp. This is handy. A lot of my background was in doing large corporate events, and the producer wants to approve every PA position for sight lines and projection cones and conflicts with lighting and everything. So I could send them the entire PA and they can import it into their file and look at any conflicts. And yes, that can be opened in SketchUp, but will not work with the venue part of the file, unfortunately. Another good question. So in the sources section with point source, what does the Z refer to? The top of the box, the flying frame, or the bottom box for stands? That's a great question. The Z refers to a different thing depending on if it's entered as an array, indicated by the A point source indicated by the P, or a subarray indicated by the S. For a subarray, it assumes the subs are going on the ground, so the Z level is the bottom of the subs. So if you put the Z at 0, the subs will be sitting on top of the ground. For an array, it assumes that the most valuable part of information is the frame height. So the height, or the Z level, is actually indicating the very top front of the frame. The front of the frame, whether it's the top or the bottom. So in this case, the frame is tilted upwards. So the frame height is the highest point of the frame. However, if the frame was tilted downwards, the height would still indicate the front, even though part of the frame still goes up as it goes backwards. With a point source, the Z level actually refers to the middle of the grill, the acoustic center of the object. So in this case, our stage is 4.92 feet, basically 5 feet tall. And if we really wanted to be exact, if our front fills were on the stage lip, we would want to put them at 5.5 feet to accommodate that half foot of the grill to put them on top. So point of origin for a point source is the front center of the grill. That's a great question. Thank you. All right. More good questions. When in sources, is there a rule of thumb between cut and 100 hertz? Or do you typically want both enabled? And your mileage may vary here. I think it depends a lot on the performance of your PA within the acoustic environment in question. The overall concept is that you either want your tops in cut or you want your subs in 100 Hertz. This is a way that we can shift the crossover point higher or lower depending on our applications. Most commonly in the market, I think it's safe to say that most people are running the tops in full range and the subs in 100 Hertz or infra mode. This tends to just be more popular, I'd say, generally speaking. However, if you wanted to reallocate some headroom, or you wanted to take advantage of the cardioid benefits of your subs, you could put the tops in cut and then run the subs normal. That is to say, not in cut mode, or not in 100 Hertz mode, and not in infra mode. However, maybe you really like the buildup in that crossover point and you want some more energy there, and you could run neither cut mode nor 100 Hertz mode. Or conversely, maybe your venue is really muddy at the frequencies in the crossover point, and you can run both the tops in cut mode and the subs in 100 Hertz mode. And there really is no wrong answer here. These are just buttons to allow you to get to your preferred voicing quickly and easily.
So Nick, this is great information about sources. Is there a nice technical document that we can refer people to where they might be able to find out some of this information?
Like what, Matt?
I've heard of this TI 385 is a very interesting document. It's a technical information document that we have on our website. It goes through basically all of this information, and this is kind of our Bible that we use in terms of system design.
So here in the download section of our website, I can type in TI, which stands for Technical Information, and do a search for my preferred language, and look at all of the technical information PDFs available. Okay, you want me to open it? Okay. And then here is TI 385. Which talks about all this stuff, including some nice graphics of crossovers there. So line array design here will give us a lot of good information, including this type of information about cut and 100 Hertz and infra modes. So definitely check it out. In fact, there's a lot of very good TI documents online. Be aware some of them are fairly old, so look at the publication date. Just a heads up. But great question and great point, Matt. I love it.
And the TI 385 does get updated fairly often when we add new speakers. The information itself is not being updated necessarily. It's just adding new information as it comes up.
Another question, are you saying you don't need to fly subs with SL series? And I'm going to answer this question from my perspective as a sound engineer. And I know that no two of us will do a show exactly the same way, so your mileage may vary. But yes, the SL series tops have more low frequency capabilities than anything ever made by Dmv. Particularly as we talk about the GSL, those tops boxes can go down to 45 Hertz without subwoofers. And personally, I think that left-right subs is a not preferred method because of the power alley effects. And so if I can keep all the subs on the ground to do the real infra-level low-frequency stuff and allow the mains to have one coherent source that includes a lot of my low-frequency energy, that would be my preference as a sound designer. And it was always a little bit my preference, but then with the SL series with the more low frequency capability, it really became true. All right, there's a couple more questions, but we're going to get into this in a minute. One question here was, what is the difference between arc and line? And the difference is a very nuanced change in the mid-frequency voicing to account for parts of the straightest PA, the straightest parts of the PA being, that is to say, with very small splay angles to be in line mode and the rest of your PA to be in arc mode. It's a very small nuanced difference in how the PA is voiced to accommodate for the way the box is summed together, depending on their splay angle. Now, if we use array processing, All of that data goes away because array processing can do things in a much more finite manner. And thus, we don't have to think about the arc or line setup. So great question there. Let's talk about a little bit of AP. I think this is a really good time. And first thing I'm going to do is harp on a concept that if anybody saw my noise calc webinar, I talked about there too. First, just a quick little bit of tour. On the left-hand side, we have 9 user slots available. These are different array processing configurations that I can put in, whether it be different things I want to try, or different parts of a show, or maybe different atmospheric conditions, morning, noon, and night, as an example. Or maybe I know that my opening band likes a certain setting, but my supporting act likes a different type of setting, and my headliner likes a different type of setting yet. So how you utilize these different settings is up to you. And I have a whole bunch of slots already pre-set up for the sake of conversation here today. So I'm going to let this recalculate. Basically, I have to recalculate because I changed venue and PA elements, which means the software now knows that there's a difference from when it originally calculated this data, and knows that it needs to recalculate new filter slots because the distances in the venue had changed. And this was when I was unshowing and reshowing ghost planes and that type of stuff. So for anybody who isn't familiar, we have 2 lines here. A very thin line, and this represents the level loss of this PA system, in this case, the mains, from the front row in brown all the way to the back row in this pink or purple. And these color codes correspond to the same color codes as my listening planes here. So the thin line is the inherent level loss from the front row to the back row. And then I have a thick line that can be my target level loss after I've turned on array processing. And the very first thing I want to be very clear on is that when the Germans first came out with array processing technology, the goal was not to augment the level loss of the PA system. The goal was to compensate for spectral inconsistencies from the front row to the back row, the type of behavior that is really common with all line arrays. So we can see down here in my direct sound versus distance plot, if I turn array processing off, cancel out of this window, and if I turn array processing to slot 1 bypass, which is no effect at all, and right now, let's say I want to look at 8K and 500 hertz. We can see the 8K, the solid line, deviates quite a bit depending on which part of the seating area you're in, especially kind of through this midpoint, which, by the way, is right where front of house is located. So depending on whether you're 8 feet further forward or further back, you'll be getting a totally different amount of 8K. Typical for a lot of line array data. Goal was this. So if I go back to my array processing slot, which does not change the level loss at all, we could see the primary benefit of array processing, where it makes every seat from the front row to the back row get exactly the same spectral response. Much better than what we were able to do with mechanical aiming alone. But you'll notice the front rows are still louder, and it drops off in level as it gets to the back. Now, I did that by making my target level loss match my intrinsic level loss, which is why I called the slot intrinsic. So you can see that the thick line here generally matches my thin line. And all I've done is use array processing to make for spectral consistency from the front rows all the way to the back rows. So this screen is signifying, I don't know, 60, 80 different smart traces from the front row to the back row. And without array processing up here, we could see the front rows get this horrible high frequency peak, whereas the back rows are very rounded off in their tonality and getting a very dull sound by comparison. And as soon as we turn on array processing, we can see that everybody's getting a much more consistent show from front to back. This is using IIR filters and FIR filters applied automatically to every box within our PA separately to make sure that the behavior of the overall array matches the geometry of our venue. But you'll notice that the distance between the brown curves here and the pink curves down here is the same. We have the same amount of level drop from the front row to the back row as we did without array processing. Whereas I have a slot here set up that I've called augmented level loss. Now visually, this may not look like a lot because the thick line hasn't changed all that much compared to my intrinsic slot here. But if we evaluate this, we can see this is actually quite a bit of level augmentation. In the front row, I've attenuated the response by about 3 dB. And in the back row, which is 230 feet away, I've boosted the response by 2 dB-ish. So another way to say this would be to say that I've applied about 5 dB of gain shading, not to the PA, but to the listening planes, which is quite a lot of change, especially when you consider we're at distances over 200 feet. And what we can see here is a slight narrowing between the brown listening planes and the pink listening planes. So we've actually augmented the throw of this PA by about 5 dB from front to back. Sure enough, if we look down here, I can switch between intrinsic, which shows this type of a slope from front to back. And then if I switch to augmented, we see that slope change a bit. And this will end up being a really impactful sonic difference to the back row and a much more consistent experience in the front row. And you'll notice that the overall tilt of this revolves around the midpoint of the venue. So if our front of house is somewhere in the middle, as we've switched between these slots, the front of house engineer hopefully should not have perceived much of a difference at all. We've just equalized the front rows and the back rows to the experience happening at front of house. All right, let's take a break for a couple of questions here. First question, do you recommend using binary angles? So this means 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0 at the top of the array. And I don't think it's a bad idea. I have heard a couple of our R&D people say that they like to avoid zeros whenever possible. But if we have a very long array, firing a short vertical distance, then you will have to get into zeros and ones just to fit all of the box aiming into our listening plane. And I think binary is perfectly fine. So hopefully that answers the question. Oh, we're getting all kinds of questions here. Let me see where we're at. What is the preferred frequencies to reference for the 3D plot, and can you combine line and arc? So within an array, you can have line and arc settings. What frequencies you want to evaluate in the 3D plot, I think depends on what you're looking at. I think most of the people here in the support team tend to lean on 4K quite a bit as the high frequency reference. And the reason is 4K is a good combination of a frequency that the array can control fairly well, meaning 4K and below, the array can control those frequencies. Whereas 8K and above, the array behavior really becomes squirrely unless you're using array processing. So 4K can be a good frequency if everything's equal.
And I think it's also important to note that once we shift over to array processing, the line and arc go away. Array processing is taking over what the line and arc settings would be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We also had a follow-up question for some clarification here. On this augmented AP slot number 3, I have attenuated the front rows by 3 dB, while boosting the back rows by about 2 dB. Right, so we've equalized the level from the front to the back. And maybe if I take this to a really extreme example, you'll get an idea here of what I mean. AP slot number 10, which I've called never do this, shows what I unfortunately see in the market quite a bit, which is people saying they want 0 dB of level loss from the front row to the back row, which array processing in this case with these KSL speakers and this distance is able to achieve. We can tell it can just barely achieve it because our realizer is almost maxed out over here, which is telling us we've implemented quite a lot of offset, of DSP offset within the array, which very frequently will have negative downsides. And I think this looks really good on paper to have 0 dB level loss from front to back. But let's think about what we've done. We've attenuated the front row more than 6 dB and boosted the back row by about 6 dB. And so we're getting pretty close to like 18 dB of, let's call it, gain shading within our PA. And I think if we were on a traditional PA where you could level offset parts of the array separately and manually, would you ever boost the top boxes by 18 dB? I would think that would seem like a pretty obvious bad idea, because you would essentially be reducing your headroom of the PA by 18 dB and really kind of breaking the array behavior in a pretty extreme way. And while this might help in the high frequencies, it would really hurt your performance in the low frequencies. So even though array processing is much smarter about how it does this, there's still a lot of downside here. And that's if we just talk about processing from front to back. Sure enough, you know, we could see there's 0 dB of level loss. This 8K and this 500 hertz are exactly the same level all the way through the venue. And if we unmute this PA and look at it in a 3D plot, looking at 4K, I predict this, it looks gorgeous. It looks like everybody has a perfect show, and this is perfect coverage. The problem here is that, yes, we've made the back rows here sound incredible. This is the best arena experience they've ever had. But we're spraying so much sonic energy at the back wall, which is 280 feet away, that that's now reflecting back into our venue with extreme vengeance, which means all of our expensive seats down here, as well as my mix engineer's experience, are suffering quite a bit. They now have an equal ratio of direct sound from the PA versus a very late reflection from the back of the room. So I like to say with array processing, with great power comes great responsibility. If this is an outdoor concert in a field, and maybe it's not a rock and roll show, but it's like the Pope speaking or some type of more utilitarian purpose, okay, maybe then you want to consider letting array processing really augment the throw of the PA in an extreme way. But if you need the PA to be loud, and you need it to sound artistically good, and you need it to feel like a rock show, this type of level loss characteristic is not going to do you any favors. I've heard a couple of people here and there express negative opinions about array processing, and the very first thing anybody from Dmv assumes is that they were on a PA that had this type of level loss configuration. This is an unfortunately common practice in the field, and I do not recommend it at all. Especially if you're not accustomed to using array processing, just start with an intrinsic level loss, like my slot number 2 here. That will make you really, really happy. This will make the back rows feel like they got much more level, because you can see here in the high frequency, they've gotten a boost of 12 to 14 dB of HF. So even though you're not changing the level loss of the PA, you're still boosting HF in the back rows by an extreme amount. And this is going to sound absolutely beautiful. Good. I would love to change the y-axis of the direct sound versus level. I like it. Let me make a note. That's great. Germany's going to hate me after this. Let's see, I think we did that one. Yeah, Finlay. There have been some hardships with the Symmetry error message that comes up. He's basically saying he's had some problems where we try to turn on array processing, and it pops up a message saying that the left part of the PA and the right part of the PA are not seeing exactly the same geometry. Therefore, it wants to split the array into 2 separate monoclusters and process them separately. And he's saying it's been really hard to identify what the symmetry issue in the venue is, and this is something that we're constantly looking into. I think in general, it's a good practice if you get that message that sometimes you can just select half of your venue, delete it, and then select the leftover half of your venue and mirror it back over to guarantee that there's some type of symmetry within your venue. But yeah, it's something that we've been talking about a lot internally for my things. Here's a great question. When taking temperature and humidity measurements, where is the optimum point to measure? Differing conditions across a venue could affect choices, and is averaging encouraged? I love the idea of averaging. No one's really doing that in the field yet, but I like the idea. In this venue, in this file, you'll notice at the top of my arrays, all 4 of my KSLs have a green line at the top. And that green line actually doesn't represent the top box. That's because in this file, I have the Dmv array site enabled. And the array site is a green laser that mounts to the top of your frame that shows you frame angle and allows you to control the laser. But it also measures temperature and humidity at the top of the arrays. And so we can plug this into our amplifier network and actually read our temperature and humidity at front of house, even though the measurement is coming from the tops of the arrays. And this is where the temperature and humidity measurement matters most, right? In fact, if we look back at our array processing, what we can see is the parts of the listening area that have suffered the most in high frequency response without array processing are the back seats. And it's because that part of the PA fires the furthest before it reaches those back seats, which means those listening planes are most susceptible to high frequency absorption than the high frequency. So getting a measurement up in the air that represents the temperature and humidity at the PA height is much more valuable than getting a temperature and humidity reading at front of house, especially since at front of house, we're surrounded by all of these human beings that are breathing hot, wet air that's really skewing our measurement in a way that isn't going to benefit the top boxes. So yes, I think averaging is a good idea, or just having measurement at the top of your array is a really good functional benefit. That's a great question. Here's another question. Why do people like to avoid 0-degree angles? And the reason is that, in fact, here, let's do this. I want a new share, and I'm going to use a whiteboard. All right, watch out, you guys. I'm going to draw a freehand with a mouse clicker. Let's say we have some boxes within our array. Get me on my regular Van Gogh. Each line array box has a flattened but slightly curved wavefront. This is so that the neighboring boxes and their wavefronts make a coherent wavefront all the way through the PA. This is the primary difference between a line source box and a point source box, because a point source box has a much more curved wavefront coming out of it, which means if you put another point source box right next to it, its curvature doesn't match the neighboring box. So you end up with this overlap area where it's just a mess. Whereas line array sources have a more flattened wavefront, but with a slight amount of curvature. And this means if we put it in 0 degrees, all the way down the amount of DSP offset we've asked array processing to incur in order to reach our goals. And right now the realizer is very, very low because my goal level loss matches the intrinsic level loss of this PA. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not sharing the screen, am I? Hold on. Yeah, I got you. I got you. There we go. Right now, my realizer is very low because my target level loss matches my intrinsic level loss. But if I copy this to a new slot, and I just call this test, As I change my level loss, you'll see the realizer start to grow exponentially, especially as I want more throw to the back seats. So this is telling me I'm asking for an incredible amount of DSP to be applied within this array. And if I get too extreme here, it goes into the red. And once it's in the red, it won't even let me calculate this slot. It is telling me, I don't know what you're trying to do, but I think that maybe you should think about picking a different PA system or changing your angles, as opposed to asking for AP to fix something that seems like a bad idea. So the realizer, while there is no real metric for what it means, it's giving you an overall sense of how much you're relying on AP to fix something that maybe should have been fixed with physical deployment of changing your frame angle or your splay angles or adding more boxes or raising the PA up higher. You know, any number of these can influence how much DSP is required to reach your goal. Okay, let's keep moving. How are we doing on time here? Wow, guys, we are plowing through this. You've totally.
We've still got a lot of questions in the hopper, and I don't know how we want to break them down. Some of them are AP, some of them are just about like aligning different components in the system, and then some of them are not about any of those things. So it's up to you kind of how you want to use the time, if you want to keep plowing through, or if you want to maybe some of these might be addressed at another webinar. I don't know.
Yeah. I think we just learned we're going to do decision making in AP part 2, or decision making in ArrayCalc part 2, huh? Maybe that'll be next week. This has been good though. How many people we still have here? Is everybody still here?
We still got 68 participants. That's pretty
cool.
good.
Okay. I'm going to tell you guys what. I want to get through a presentation that I made, and we're going to talk about the phase, the wrapped phase trace in the alignment tab, because I want to make sure we get this through here, especially for people who are newer to ArrayCalc, and then we can spend more time as needed when we go through the rest of our file. I know. No. Hey, Matt, how come I don't see my subtrace here? Oh, sorry, you're not looking at my screen.
I'm not.
All right, we got a lot of power users in the room. How come my blue mains trace here? Oh, I know, because AP hasn't been properly calculated.
That would do it.
If only there was a Dmv guy here. There we go.
Call support.
Yeah, call support. All right, you guys. We get a metric crap ton of questions about the wrapped phase trace, which of course correlates to how do I align my subs to my mains. And so I've been trying to figure out how to explain this for a while. And I want you guys to be the guinea pigs here on my new presentation. All right. So the screenshot from ArrayCalc, we have a KSL main and we have an SL sub, and we want to time align it at where that little white dot is in the green listening plane, which is right about where front of house is. So the question always comes up, what the heck is this? What does it mean? How do I evaluate it? And to talk about this a little bit more, we're going to take a step back and talk about phase profiles of speakers in general. And of course, we're used to seeing this in Smart as well. The visualization looks slightly different, but it's the same idea of a wrapped phase trace. And let's be clear on something right off the bat. A wrapped phase trace is exactly the same as an unwrapped phase trace, which we see here. And every loudspeaker in the world has its own phase profile. These are two unwrapped phase traces I've grabbed from random Google image searches, so I have no idea what speakers these are, and it doesn't matter. On the left, we see magnitude as well as a unwrapped phase trace in pink. And then on the right, we see two phase traces of a red, one speaker represented by red, and the other speaker represented by blue. By the way, these represent two identical model loudspeakers measured at the same distance. And you can see that even their phase profiles don't match each other, even though they're the same loudspeaker, which I think is interesting. And in general, the unwrapped phase trace is very, very easy to read. We're looking at parts of this frequency response that arrive earlier in time and parts of the frequency response that arrive later in time. And every loudspeaker in the world has this type of a slope, whereas the exact differences, the nuance of the slope change depending on the speaker model. So why do all loudspeakers have this kind of slope of phase? Well, there's a lot of influences that go into loudspeaker design that affect the arrivals of sound coming out of this loudspeaker. They include things like any processing on the front end, whether it's digital or analog. This would be any type of crossover or equalization, any group delay, etc. Then most loudspeakers, especially Dmv loudspeakers, have some form of passive crossover circuitry inside the cabinet. This is helping to split frequencies between high frequency, mid frequency, and low frequency drivers. And these all have an effect on phase profile as well. And then lastly, things like the actual cabinet design. So in this little cartoony example, we can see a tuned port that intentionally makes the low frequencies inside the box take longer to come out of the box so that when it reaches the front of the port, it's in time with the same frequency coming out of the speaker. So the cabinet here is intentionally slowing down low frequencies in order to gain more output in the low end. A couple of Dmv examples of clever cabinet construction are the V point source, the V7P there at the top, and the V sub at the bottom. Both of these cabinets are very clever in their design to allow the cabinet to control the path length of sound, to control dispersion characteristics of these loudspeakers. So in the V sub at the bottom, it is a cardioid subwoofer that still only requires 1 amp channel to run, because the cardioid effect is actually being handled by the cabinet construction, not by DSP. But all of these influences end up affecting the phase profile of a loudspeaker. So they all have that slope. Low frequencies arriving later than high frequencies due to all of these influences. So here we are back at this wrapped phase trace. And I'm going to very quickly and easily convert this wrapped phase trace into an unwrapped phase trace. And I'm going to do that by grabbing a section of this and just sliding it upward till the lines connect. And I'm going to keep doing this for sections of this wrapped phase trace with a little bit of rearrangement. And sure enough, this should start to look really familiar, just like one of the examples of an unwrapped phase trace we saw. I can also do the same thing by taking the unwrapped phase trace on the right and re-visualizing this as a wrapped phase trace simply by grabbing parts of it and sliding it back down. Now they're both wrapped phase traces. So this gives you an idea of what we're actually looking at here when we looked at a wrapped phase trace. Then when we looked at the wrapped phase trace in ArrayCalc, when we're aligning subs to tops, we look at a very narrow part of the frequency range because we only care about frequencies that are coming out of both the tops and the subs at equal level. That means we only care about the frequency range handled by the crossover point. So when we see a wrapped phase trace in ArrayCalc, the only part of the frequencies we're looking at is the part of that crossover point. So now in this example here, we see the KSL main in blue and the white SL sub are almost totally out of phase with each other because the slopes of the lines don't line up at all. They line up about as poorly as possible. So we have a phase cancellation at whatever point this was measured at. Now, this is all fine and good, and I hope that this answers some questions for the newbies in the room and also kind of gives a little bit of insight to the power users in the room. But I want to take a step back and talk about aligning systems with Dmv speakers in general and say it's actually much, much simpler than looking at a wrapped phase trace. And that is to say, the only reason we have to align these KSL tops to this SL sub here is simply because the KSL top is further away. We have to add delay to the subs so that they are the same relative distance from the listener, so that the sound waves from the top arrive at the listener at the same time as the sound waves from the sub. And the only reason we have to do that is because the KSL is flown up in the air, which means it's further away. So yeah, we could just move the KSL forward and not introduce any delay at all. And as long as the tops and the subs are from the same series of loudspeaker and they're the same distance from the listener, no delay is required. This is true with all DMV systems. We're only adding delay to compensate for distance offsets. And if we can fix that by making the distance offsets not existent, then we're great. We don't have to time align anything. However, on a show, we don't typically have that much control over the PA fly positions. So sometimes the offset is unavoidable, at which point we just add some delay to the subs. And this is very, very easy as well. We know that there's a 4-foot offset between the tops and the subs. We know that sound travels at 1,125 feet per second, or the other way of saying that same thing is it travels 1.125 feet per millisecond. So if we say there's a 4-foot offset times 1.12 milliseconds, that the sub wants 4.5 milliseconds of delay. Or personally, I just kind of round it off and say a foot is roughly equal to a millisecond and just kind of guesstimate some numbers. And so sure enough, if we look back here at our example, we add in 4.5 milliseconds of delay, and we have near perfect alignment of the sub and the top at that green position in the middle. And in fact, you can change R1 to measure things in distance instead of milliseconds. So you can replace your smart system with a laser disto and just shoot the offset and enter in the amount of feet difference between your tops and subs and be done with it. Now, this is all fine and good when we talk about one listening plane, a field. Where this gets extra complicated here is when we talk about multi-level listening areas like this balcony, right? So we have some flown KSL mains and subs. We also have some subs on the ground. Then we have a main floor and 2 levels of balcony. And the question here becomes, where do we want the ground subs to be aligned with the flown subs? Because they can't be aligned everywhere. As an example, do we want them aligned for this position where the subs need a lot of delay? Or do we want them aligned for this position where they're actually aligned already without delay being applied? Or do we want them aligned here where the mains actually want to have delay applied? Or even more extreme up here. With this type of physical spacing between our flown speakers and our ground speakers, they can only align at one place within the venue. And this is frequently while you see a DMV support person trying to convince you in this type of situation, flown subs are better because they're more equidistant to all the listening areas. Therefore, time alignment ends up being more consistent. Especially in a theater, if you can hang a center cluster of subs, that works out pretty well. But if you can't do that, you have to just pick an area within the middle-ish of your venue where you want your PA to align correctly, and that'll be the only place where it can align correctly just because of the geometry of the venue. Thanks, Richie. Good comment. Appreciate that. How are we feeling about that in general? See, was there another chat here? Bye, Rob. Sorry you got to take off. I know we're running towards the end of time anyways. And I don't mind staying around a little extra here. I know Zach and Matt might have to take off, but I'm okay to hang out for a little bit longer.
I'm here with you.
Cool, man. Let's see what else we got here for questions. Jones told me to be aware that 0 degrees in compression mode is, of course, more than 0 degrees absolute in order for the mechanical tolerances. That's right. As soon as we fly our PA in compression mode, the PA is being compressed, so the boxers are being pulled away from each other because the load path of the rigging changes slightly. So 0 degree pin actually equals somewhere around 1/4 of a degree or 1/2 a degree or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Tell Jones I said hi next time you talk to him. What else we got for questions here? We'll figure out how to prioritize a little bit of extra time. Best practices for main to side AP seam matching for even coverage horizontal as well as vertical between your two sources. I think that's a great topic. So we have our mains, we have our sides, which by the way, these sides are turned out 85 degrees off axis, which we found in our testing in real arenas is a really good place to get an even coverage seam between the sides and the mains. I know typically we're used to seeing these sides be pointed more like 45 degrees out, but that's only because of the omnidirectional behavior of non-SL series speakers. And as soon as we have a very well-behaved constant directivity box, you can actually turn the side out much, much more, and in many cases not need a third hang for the 270-degree coverage. But yeah, the question is how do we control the array processing level loss for the main to make it match more with the side? And I think this is another example why we want to lean on the intrinsic level loss more and more. And what we can do here is we can actually look at the level loss characteristics of this main. And in this case, I'm going to look at a distance, I don't know, of approximately 130, 150 feet. And I'm going to say with my intrinsic level loss, we have a drop, a total net drop of about 6 dB-ish, maybe 7 dB out here, which means then I can go to my outfills, pull up their AP slot, and I can try to make sure, I'll call this match mains, and I can try to make sure that at about 100 to 150 feet, we see a similar amount of level drop overall. What did I say, 6 or 7? Yeah, something like that. And as it turns out, this is very close to intrinsic. So it just goes to show if you match the intrinsic level loss, you'll probably be in a good position right off the bat. And sure enough, if I come back here, oh yeah, one of my slots needs to be recalculated or deleted. Great. Now I can look at level loss of the mains and the sides overall. And see if they cover pretty well, except for I'm missing some holes up here. And this is simply because I don't have my sides overshooting as much as I should, nor my mains. So I might want to tilt it up and recalculate. But we can see a very consistent amount of level loss as we wrap around the side of the venue. And this is a good thing. The only thing I want to be careful of in this case is missing these seats a little bit too much up here, which means I would want to tilt up my mains and my sides to get the overlap to go to a higher place in the venue, which might mean extending my ghost planes up a bit higher as well. The other thing I really don't like here, I mean, we already talked about how I'm not a huge fan of flown left-right subs. I'll show you exactly why in a very easy way to describe it. By unmuting my left-right subs, selecting 80 Hertz or any other low frequency and make sure interferences is turned on, and I hit recalculate. And sure enough, I see the power alley effect. And I don't like this because I don't want anybody who's sitting in one of these nulls to not get any of the kick drum at all. So I try to avoid that. But There are arguments to use flown subs, namely getting energy out here to the side seats a little bit more, and in which case we might want to consider just tilting them off stage. And this does two things. One, gets a little more energy out here to the side, and two, the null of these cardioid subwoofers is now on the stage, so we've reduced the low frequency level on the stage at the same time. That makes it a win-win. Speaking of which, how many people here are turning their outer subs outwards? Yeah, all right, good. We're seeing some raised hands. I see you, Dylan. I see you, Roy. That's good. I was just wondering how many people are still hanging on and hanging out, so that's good. Thank you for the interaction, you guys. That's wonderful. So what I'm talking about here is on our subarray, it's really common that we don't feel like we're getting enough energy out to these side seats out here. And maybe a lesser man might say, well, I just want to add more and more delay to try to fan this out wider and wider, which is effective. But more and more, we're introducing delay that has all these subs firing at different times, which is maybe losing a little bit of impact. It's also maybe losing a little bit of headroom. And while it looks good on paper, maybe it doesn't have the same punchy tone that we want. Whereas maybe a better solution was to leave our delay times pretty tight, but just actually turn the outer subs outwards. This is the benefit of working with cardioid subwoofers. We're able to get more low frequency out to the side seats without having to introduce delay, because we can point the subwoofer where we want the sound to come from. And in this case, I actually have them offset backwards slightly as well. I could even take this back a little bit more, which would allow me to get more wrap around the sides while needing even less delay in those outer subwoofers. The more I can physically create an arc, the better it will be naturally without having to implement DSP to fix it. Those are a couple of points I wanted to get out here. Personally, I'll do without the flown subs and just do the ground subs. And now with the new CPL feature of our SL series, I can still keep all the low end energy, all that punch out of the mains, while pulling out all of the mud of the low mid at the same time. So this is a newly available CPL for KSL and GSL loudspeakers.
And I think a good point to all of what you just talked about is that ArrayCalc is an incredibly powerful tool for trying out different things like this. You know, try moving your outer subs, angling them out a little bit, try your flown subs out a little bit. And ArrayCalc is going to show you what those interactions are going to look like, so that you're not having to try things out on site. You know, you can do all of this virtually and get a very good representation of what that's going to look and sound like.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Aubrey. Some very kind words. I appreciate that. We have a question from Lucas. Is there a way to change the AP slot at the same time for all of your arrays? That's a great question. There is, although it's not automatically built for you. But I think that this might serve as an excellent moment to take a little break from ArrayCalc. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that ArrayCalc file I just saved, and I'm going to open it in R1. Anybody who's new here, R1 is a Dmv remote control software, which goes online and talks to our amplifier processors directly. And the first time I open this file, it's going to know it's the first time, and it's going to give me a message that says, do you want to auto-generate groups and remote views? And I'm going to click yes. And it's going to build me a series of customized controls for my PA system based on how it was built in ArrayCalc. So for anybody who isn't familiar, this allows me now to go online with my system, and I can do things like recall my ArrayCalc snapshot, which sets all of my PA parameters to the same way they were modeled in ArrayCalc, so I don't have to set any new settings. And I can switch the array processing slots as needed on a per array basis. So this is the page for my mains, and I can switch its AP slots, and I can go to my outfills and switch its AP slots. At the moment, there is not an easy way to switch all the AP slots at the same time. What I could do is copy and paste these controls, as well as these controls, excuse me, onto a new remote view. And then I could set both of these to AP slot 2 and save that as a snapshot that targets only that remote view. I could switch both of these to AP slot 3, target that to a snapshot, and then I could have a button that automatically switches all of my PA at once. It may not be worth the extra time to do this on a mobile show, but if this is an installation in a venue, I would certainly be doing this so I could switch my AP slots for my whole venue at one button press.
And Nick, one other thing that I've actually encountered with this is now that we've introduced this THC temperature humidity calculator, you can actually target that to a tops group. And within that, you can make fine adjustments to all of your arrays simultaneously. So, so while you might have to load larger array processing slots for big jumps in temperature and humidity, you can make fine adjustments across all of your arrays if they're targeted to a tops group. And I'll note that this, you can't just attach that THC window to like your mains group, because this can only affect tops that have array processing on them. But if you go to like that mains tops group right there, where you're going to have all your mains and your outfills, you can adjust all of those simultaneously within this that THC window, which is really cool.
The new CPL would be very nice with the Vs. Yeah, Dylan, I hear you. Dylan, you just got to buy a new PA. What's the problem? I know the Vs work well for you, but have you considered KSL? Come on, you got 2 new buttons. Huh? Just kidding. Yeah, good questions. How can you use ArrayCalc to look at top to sub ratios? Ooh, that's kind of a good question. I like that. I'm going to quit R1 and not save this. Here's a pro tip for y'all if you don't know it. In my file, I have the noise calc reference point turned on, which means it's visible down here. I can do that by going to Settings, Advanced Features, and make sure that the button is enabled right here. Otherwise, this would not be visible yet. And this is probably how your ArrayCalc looks by default. And what this is this is a place within the venue where I can put a virtual measurement mic. Right now, I have it placed at front of house in the center of our venue here. And you'll see as I click buttons around, my little white dot moves. So I can place that anywhere I want. And what I can do here is unmute my PA, maybe everything except for my subs. I can send it some broadband signal, like this IEC test signal works really well for headroom tests. And I can boost the level of this virtual noise generator until I start to see parts of my PA go into gain reduction. So at plus 7.5 dB, I can see that my mains are beginning to go into gain reduction. And I never know which boxes will go into gain reduction first because array processing is mysterious. And I'll back it down so that I'm 0.5 dB under gain reduction. So I see no gain reduction happening in my PA. And right now, I can tell that my mains are putting out 114.1 dBA at front of house. So I can tell this PA in this physical configuration with these array processing settings will give me 114 dB on a D80 amplifier. So I keep in mind that that's 114, and then I mute this, and I only unmute the subs, and I turn it up until I see subs go into gain reduction. There we go, 1 click under. Now I can see that the subs in this PA will give me 106.9 dBA, and I can see how much headroom I have available on the subs without the mains turned on. And this can give me an idea of the kind of spectrum I'm capable of with this PA before hitting gain reduction. You'll notice at front of house, when I turn these flown subs off, I only lose about 1 dB, 1.4 dB of output. So even though I've added 12 SL subs and a whole bunch of D80 amplifiers, I'm only getting about 1.5 dB of extra headroom at front of house because of the vertical offset between these clusters and the alignment settings as is. And if I was evaluating subwoofer headroom, I might want to be looking at a dBc reading. So I could tell I have 117.8 dBc at front of house before my ground subs only go into gain reduction because my flown subs are muted. So for us at Dmv, it's not really about a recommended ratio of cabinets. It's about critically evaluating if you're able to reach the type of spectrum you need for a given show. Because we could tell you a ratio of top to sub cabinets all day long, but how do you know that that's for an EDM festival and not a classical concert? It really differs depending on your needs. There is no blanket statement. So being able to look at headroom capabilities is really the key. Because at the end of the day, if you need a really bass heavy mix for a hip hop or an EDM show, but it's not that large of an audience and it doesn't have to be that loud, you might be able to do the whole thing with just 2 SL subs. Whereas you might need 6 Vs aside just because of the vertical coverage required. So there is no real blanket statement there. So this is how I would look at that type of headroom. Good question. What else we have here? It would be a fun thing to be able to have a user snapshot for AP that could overlay your AP window. This will allow you to be able to compare a main working slot to a side working window. Right, agreed. Yeah, a way that you could have 2 windows at the same time. Good call, Red. Note made. All right, Finlay asks, that extra 0.2 degrees from the compression benefits AP calculations compared to tension when it's small angles of 0. Yeah, I agree with that. Good point. Absolutely. Can AP help keep the low end buildup from outfills if the mains are SL, outfills are JV or Y? Yes, it can control the low end buildup in a very positive way. This is because array processing is hitting a target curve at the listener position. So it will automatically be making all of the low mid response of your arrays be more similar. And it's interesting because we know that when we hang traditional Dmv systems like J, Y, and V next to an SL series, that part of the cancellation of SL actually helps cancel the J, Y, or V series as well. So that can help clean things up. But at the end of the day, there is no replacement for SL series next to SL series for your main hang and your side hang. Nothing will be as clean as that will be, for sure. Good question, though. When setting up devices, why do my ID numbers set up inefficiently? Yeah, it's because it's constantly populating numbers here in this list to try to make this file be compatible with R1, because we never want to allow you to save an ArrayCalc file that can easily crash R1. But here's the tip. If we multi-select all of my groups and my first amp ID is set to 0.01 channel AB, with my cursor in that numeric entry field, I can hold down on my Mac the command key and hit enter, and it will automatically sequence all of my IDs through the rest of my PA system. And I can just keep hitting enter all the way through. And this is one way I could ID my system. This is also a very quick and easy way to see if I have any leftover amplifier channels and to get an accurate count of amps in the parts list tab. So there's a nice little pro tip for you. And if you ever forget the shortcut, all you have to do is mouse over the window and wait. like this. How come it's not doing it now? How come it always pops up except for when I try to show it popping up? Why does that happen, Matt?
Might be because you're multi-selected. You've got multiple sources selected.
Yeah,
so
let's
it's
try
confused.
that. I think it's because
Maybe
I'm
not.
screen sharing.
I think that's probably true.
Classic. I got to remember that. All right. But typically when you mouse over this, it will give you a little pop-up window that shows you the keyboard shortcut for the auto assign keyboard shortcut. Matt, you want to handle a couple of questions real quick while I drop off for a second?
Yeah, let's see what we've got here.
BRB.
So we've got one, our snapshots and system settings in R1 based or sitting in the amplifiers. Is there ever an option that reconnecting can change the system and amp settings? So this is a good question that we talk about in a little bit of our other seminars about the push and pull of the information. So say your drive rack or your computer goes down in the middle of the show. When you fire your computer back up, no, it is not going to change any system settings. Basically, as long as your PA configuration is the same in your R1 file, it's going to pull the information from the amplifiers. So delay, EQ, and all that is living on the amplifiers, not in R1. R1 is a view showing you what's going on in the amplifiers. But as soon as you reconnect, it's going to pull that information from the amplifiers back to your R1 file. And no, you shouldn't have any ill effects of reconnecting. I know that can be a very scary thing, but no, you shouldn't have to worry about that. Let's see what else we got. The bottom box height should be the same between mains and outfills. Generally, that's going to kind of depend on your venue. But in a situation like this, yeah, you might want to have those bottom boxes at the same height so that you can get similar level and similar kind of delay from the mains, because you're obviously going to have a little bit of bleed over between those
Yeah,
hangs.
I love that question, because that's actually the part where our mains and sides are overlapping coverage the most.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the down part of the hang. So you'll see here in this file, I have the mains and the sides, the bottom boxes at the same height. I care less about the top boxes being at the same height than I do about the bottom boxes. And the reason is super simple. If I unmute one side of my PA and look at NHF like 4K, let's get an idea of how far out here it covers. And then I'll do the same thing by unmuting one side of the outfill. And there's quite a lot of overlap right down here. And sure enough, if my side hang was the way I see a lot of people do it, turn off AP so I could move the array. My side hang is higher so that the tops of the arrays match. At the bottom, there's this level offset. So now I have a choice. I can either make the coverage overlap, I can make it correct out here, or I could make it correct down here, but I can't do both because of the physical arrangement between these two arrays. Whereas if I lower that side back down just slightly so that the bottom boxes are about at the same height, now I can add a delay that will work for the bottom as well as the overlap out here. Yeah, good one. I love that, Lucas. Thanks. All right, we got some more people dropping off too. Thanks for spending the time with us. What do you guys think? Should we go a little longer or should we call it a day? I mean, a couple hours on video chat's a long time, but anybody who hangs out with me knows I could talk all day, and that doesn't necessarily mean you guys want to listen to it. What do you think? Show of hands if people want to keep going. Okay, that's cool. And so I'm cool to hang out. Matt and Zach, if you guys want to hang out or you want to take off, it's cool too. I realize you guys might have other things to do, so
I'm good for a little while.
Yeah, man, let's keep hanging out. And anybody else, if you're getting tired of listening to my voice and Matt and everything, or you just got something else to do, feel free to go away. That's all right. No worries. I won't be offended. What else we got for questions, Matt?
Let's see. Where do you stop covering your front fills?
What do you think? You want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's going to depend a little bit on what your main PA configuration is. You know, generally you don't want your main PA to come all the way to the downstage edge. And sometimes physically that's not possible. You know, your PA might be shooting 15 to 20 feet out from the downstage edge. And so really your front fills are going to be covering in that gap with a little bit of overlap. And the idea behind that is not only are we filling in the front, i.e. front fill, but once front fills are properly time aligned to the mains, you're actually shifting your image of the sound back towards the stage. Whereas, you know, the PA above you might be shooting at you from 20, 30 feet above. So without front fills, you know, you are going to hear the band from above you, but you'll be seeing them in front of you. So having those properly aligned front fills, you know, covering the right amount of distance is going to actually shift that image back down towards the stage, which is a cool thing about psychoacoustics and how all that works. And I think a good tool for that is using ArrayCalc to kind of see your level across there. You know, a lot of times when you start out with a design, your front fills might be at 0 dB and you might have a huge hot spot there at the front of the stage. So kind of going through some of those SPL calculations, yeah, exactly like that. You know, compared to your mains, you might not necessarily need that much energy, so you might be able to bring those down 4 or 5 dB or more. And then I think just to tag onto that, within your front fills and your point sources, you have a couple options as far as cut filter and HFA, which is your high frequency attenuation. And I think that's also going to kind of depend on the distance that you're filling with your front fills. If they're on a stage lip and your audience is at a barricade, you know, 5 feet from that, you might want to attenuate some of that high frequency information so you're not just blasting people in the face. But if you're at a larger festival or an arena like this, you know, you might have your barricade 10 feet out or possibly more. So you might want a little bit of that high frequency information to be able to travel a little bit farther. And I think some of that just comes down to personal preference and kind of looking at those smart traces when you're aligning your PA and making sure that you're getting equivalent high frequency information from your tops and your front fills.
Yeah, so to piggyback on what Matt said, you'll notice in this file, we have the listening plane starting way out in front of the stage. And that's because, like most arena shows, there's a subline, there's a barricade, and then there's, you know, seating or general admission after the barricade. So first of all, we're not even looking at anything right at the front of the stage. We're going to wait till we get 6, 8, or 10 feet out in front of the stage. And what I've done is down here, I have just the mains unmuted so I can see how their coverage is. And up on this window, I have just the front fills unmuted, so I can see that if I turn them down by 7 dB, this will give me good coverage to the front. And this is how I would probably do it if this is going to be a standing audience. because I know that my front fills aren't going to penetrate very deep past the first row of people, right? Because there's people standing in front of the front fills. So getting just enough hotspot in the front to redirect people's attention down to the stage is very valuable. But now that I have levels set between these two zones, this is now a really good time for me to go to my alignment tab. And with my test point highlighted, I can click around and find the area at where my mains in blue and my front fills in brown are arriving at the same level. So as I click around, I'm looking at this graph on the right, and here's a good spot where the front fills and mains are at the same level. So I know that with that amount of attenuation on my front fills, they match with my mains right there in level, which means this is a really good place for me to add delay to my front fills so that they arrive at the same time, and now it's aligned. Because if you do alignment with the front fills turned up at 0 dB, like Matt said, they'll be way too loud. You'll do alignment based on that level, and then you'll end up turning them down, which will change at where they're equal level, which means you'll have to redo time alignment. This is part of the hardship of doing smart live on site, whereas in ArrayCalc, we can make these decisions very, very quickly and easily. What else we got, Matt?
Oh, let's see. Do you have plans for a small format SL box that could be used as front fills for corporate shows? Currently, we do not have a small format SL box that could be used for front fills at corporate shows, but we do have plenty of other speakers in our lineup that work very well for front fills. Many of our E-series are nice and compact speakers. The smaller E-series are going to be conical concentric drivers. It's going to give you a nice dispersion there for front fills. And then as you get into some of our larger front fills, our Y10Ps, obviously those are going to have a lot more horsepower, but they have the same kind of dipole configuration that's going to give you keep a little bit of that energy off the stage. But
yeah, I love that question because you know, any of us that's done a whole bunch of corporate knows that those front fills love the feedback and on the lav mics and electron mics. And we know from people using SL series, the people on stage feel like the front fills are turned up really loud because it's the only part of the PA that isn't full broadband dispersion control. So behind the speaker, it sounds like they're louder than the rest of the PA. So I think that's a great idea.
And just to tag onto that, I will say that I love using array processing for corporate shows. I've done tons of very large ballrooms where you might have, you know, multiple delay setups, and being able to use array processing to, you know, cover a little bit of your level loss, your frequency distribution, and to really blend those seams between your delays as well. You know, most of you might know that most ballrooms are just a giant rectangle, and that can be terrible for acoustics. But by using some of these, you know, array processing techniques, you can actually decrease the level at the very back of the room coming from the mains, having the delays take over a little bit more, and really decrease or sometimes even eliminate the slap back that you might be getting off of that back wall, which is really cool. And I've often found that when using you know, well deployed PA with good array processing slots, you might actually only need a high pass filter for some of those lav mics, as opposed to what you might be used to with having a 31 band on each lav mic and on a group and on your left or right. I've gotten in a lot of situations where with podium mics and lav mics where with a well deployed PA, all it takes is a high pass filter, and that's really impressive and something to be said about that.
Yeah, especially with the SL series, absolutely.
Yeah.
We had a couple of questions about the devices tab. One of the questions is, can you change the auto numbering for a company that uses like kind of what would seem like random amp IDs, but they correspond to like inventory of racks. And my suggestion there would be actually to use the start ID function. So you could say that with my mains selected, maybe my mains left is all of the amps that are 4.01 and on, but my right is all of the amps that are 7.01 and on. And then you can just hit configure amps, and this will automatically sequence all of your devices here to match those start numbers. Now notice in this case, I had ArraySite turned on, and the ArraySite has an ID just like an amplifier does, and it's at the top of the array. So it made the ArraySite 4.01 and 7.01, which maybe I did or didn't want. So in this case, I could actually deactivate ArraySite, hit configure amps. Now my first amp is 4.01 and 7.01. Then I could re-enable ArraySite and enter in whatever IDs I wanted for my ArraySites. And then Roy also asked, could I look at the amp IDs from left to right? And I think here's what he's asking. If we look at our subarray, our furthest house left sub is the last one in the list. And so if you're like me, I would want that ID to be the first of my subwoofer IDs. And so sure enough, it's magically working now. It pops up this little hint, and it tells me to enter remote ID. Whoops, now it went away. Enter command plus enter to assign the next remote ID sequentially to go downwards, or command shift enter to go upwards. So I could say, I want this to be my first sub ID, hit command shift and enter, and it will auto sequence up the list, thus sequencing left to right from my house perspective. Great question. Then a follow-up. Roy's asking about network devices. So I'm going to turn on some more advanced features here just for a second. Audio networking and soundscape. And this is for if our project was to include the DS100 and DS10s. What I could do here is enter these devices, whether or not this DS100 has NSCENE or in space. I could also enter a couple of DS10s. And in this case, if I had a DS100 and DS10s, when I go back to my sources page, I can then specify a patch to say this PA came from this DS10, this output, and this output of the DS100 as an example. And once I patch my whole PA, I can even export a Dante preset file that I can open in Dante Controller, which will patch all of my cross points, label all of my inputs and outputs, and label my devices automatically. Now, this is only helpful if you have a DS100 and DS10s. If you're only using DS10s, this page won't do anything useful for you, and I recommend just not having that turned on because it will create more hardship than a benefit. All right, here's a common question. In AP, if the realizer is color orange, is that bad? What do you think, Matt?
I would say generally, well, not even generally, yes. Yes. Even in my craziest PA configurations, I try to keep it to a maximum of 2 yellow bars, if that. Now, if you're going with just the intrinsic level drop-off, you're going to get incredible results on the spectral response of the PA, and it's going to still be in line with what the PA would naturally be doing. And as you really start to mess with that level loss, you're going to see that realizer meter will move up fairly quickly, depending on what your distances are. So I would say anything over 2 yellow bars, you're going to really start noticing the effects of array processing. But I think in general, trying to stay as true to that intrinsic, line in the back is going to give you the best results with the least amount of side effects.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I mean, in this particular case, I'm at a realizer of just getting into the yellow, and I've attenuated the front rows by 5 dB, boosted the back rows by 4 dB. This is 9 dB of broadband gain shading. So would you ever type in minus 9 dB on your bottom boxes of the line array? Probably not. That's quite a bit. And same thing with array processing. Once you start to look at that level, it's something to double think about. Yeah, I think that's use your best judgment there. But just keep in mind what you're reading here. You've essentially boosted the back rows by 9 dB. That's quite a lot. And considering it's 9 dB broadband, in fact, if we calculate this, 9 dB broadband is also, in this case, going to have a much bigger HF boost. So in the purple, we were down to about minus 36 dB without AP, and now with AP, we're up to about minus 20, so 16 dB of boost in the HF. That's quite a lot.
Yeah, and like Nick mentioned before, you are going to notice the effects of that on site. You will notice that the image has shifted far above your head because the PA is putting so much energy at the top of that array to shoot to those far places that you're going to lose a lot of your headroom where you are at front of house because all of that has been shifted for those really far throws.
Mm-hmm. We had a question about subarray optimization. Of course. There's a couple of things to consider here when we talk about the placement of our subs and what the goals are. And I want to be absolutely clear right off the bat. Talking about impact and even coverage, there's absolutely nothing in the world better than a single sub position right in the middle of your venue, especially when it's not turned to the side. This is beautiful sub coverage, but 1 or 2 SL subs isn't going to cover this whole arena, and we probably can't do a 16 high stack of subs, although I'd sure love to see someone do that on a gig. So we have to get into horizontal subarrays in order to get good consistent dispersion while not blocking sight lines and creating a 16-foot high leaning tower of subwoofers that will make our local crew kill us. Here's where we get into multiple positions, such in this case, I don't know, we could do 10 positions, and each position could have 2 subs in it. And then what I like to do is use the equally spaced along tool to space out the subs. And I like this for a couple of reasons. One, it's a very quick way to space all the subs out evenly. And 2, it gives me this number here, max frequency for pattern control. This means that with the sub spaced in this way, I can control all sub frequencies up to 112 hertz. And let me show you why this is important. If, let's say I had half as many sub positions and I spaced them along that same amount, right now I only have pattern control up to 50 hertz. And down below, I can see my blue, which currently represents 80 hertz, is spiraling out of control. It's doing horrible, horrible things that I don't want to happen to my venue. And I don't want the audience members off to the side to only get 80 hertz and nothing else. So in this case, I can see I've spaced out my sub positions too much. They're 13 feet apart, which only gives me pattern control up to 50 hertz, which means anything above 50 hertz is wildly spinning out of control, and this is bad. On the other side, if I have too many positions spread along the same amount, I will see that my subs are too close together. These are cardioid subwoofers, and for a cardioid sub to work, it relies on the amount of space for the sound to wrap around the sides of the cabinet for the front drivers and the rear drivers to interact together. And for all cardioid subwoofers made by DMV, we recommend having a 2-foot gap in between subcabinets to allow for this breathing to happen. And right now we can see there's very little gap there. We never want to see the subs side by side. What'll happen in that case is you'll be taking a cardioid sub and turning it almost completely into an omnidirectional sub, because now the front drivers and rear drivers are not interacting correctly. So this shows us what's too close. 12, 13 more feet apart is too far. And usually people have their subs spaced in the kind of 6 to 8 foot spacing range. And that is center of cabinet to center of cabinet. So if I take this back down to 10 positions, equally spaced along 55 feet, hit apply layout. Apply layout. Now I can see they're all spaced evenly with a nice little gap in between them. I have good pattern control for all frequencies below 112 Hertz, which means now I can put in horizontal dispersion. And my rule of thumb here is that essentially I never want to exceed roughly 10 milliseconds of delay within my subarray. There are exceptions to every rule, but my anecdotal experience leads me to believe that once we have subs firing 10 milliseconds later than other subs, we're starting to really lose impact and lose some punch out of the system. So trying to look at the delay offset in here, make sure we're within a 10 millisecond window, I think is valuable. With that being said, I've also done shows where we had 48 sub positions spread out along, gotta let it think here for a minute, I don't know, 150-ish feet or so. Because the stage is so incredibly wide and everybody at the show loves bass, i.e. Electric Daisy Carnival and shows like that. And at this point, I would need to go wider to leave a space in between the subs. But as soon as I hit apply delays, I'm gonna start saying some crazy wicked delay times out here to the sides. Because this array is so wide to maintain the dispersion, it will have to introduce lots and lots of delay. And I think for this type of a situation, it's okay, because after all, I have 96 SL subs. So I don't care how I run this, it's gonna be awesome, right? I think 96 SL subs is about as big as any show has ever gotten on the history of Earth. And it's definitely a fun day. I'll guarantee you that much. All right, put my subs back in the middle like a normal show. But of course, remember, you can always turn the subs too. That's valuable. Ultimately, though, I want to make sure that all of my frequencies coming out of the subarray have a similar dispersion pattern. That's the goal here. This is the overall theme with all DMV systems. We want to make sure every audience member and every seat is getting the same spectral response, so that everybody has the same ratio of kick drum to lead vocal to hi-hat, no matter where they are, so that the mix translates. That's always the primary goal when we talk about optimizing a DMV system.
I think we have an alignment question that kind of follows up with that. So a question concerning phase alignment of subarray and mains. Would you switch off the different delay times of the sub positions, or just keep the delays and consider the whole subarray to be one virtual speaker or sub?
Yeah, I think it's really important to keep all the delay times on. Yeah, absolutely. And the way this works, just to be clear, whenever we use our sub alignment tool, it will give us this cross section at the on-axis line of whatever part of the PA we're comparing the subarray to. So in this case, we're comparing the subarray to our mains. And so sure enough, up here, it says this on-axis representation is the mains left at 0 degrees aiming. So that means our alignment point for the subarray tool is essentially right down this cross section of the venue on the main left. And this is what follows the overall democracy for listeners approach of aligning a DMV PA to make sure that this subarray and the alignment is fanned out across the largest amount of audience possible. There are plenty of situations where you might want to align your subs to tops at front of house, especially if it's a guest engineer who's really driving up levels and pissing off your neighbors, and you definitely don't want to leave your front of house guy in a vacuum because of a little bit of call it political psychology involved. And in which case, what we can do here is unmute our whole PA that's doing low end. We can look at some low frequencies and crossover point, maybe 100, or in this case, maybe 80, because our subs are in infra mode. Make sure interferences is turned on and do a calculation with all of our delay times included, just to ensure we're not accidentally creating a hole at front of house. This is one of the things the 3D plot comes in really handy for. Once we've done all of the optimization of our subsystems, we always want to check it in a 3D plot. This is the equivalent of walking the room. Never assume it sounds good on the 300 level until you actually go up to the 300 level. And this is what the 3D plot is for, right? To check for the unintended consequences of the rest of our PA. For example, I have a couple of AP slots here on my mains, which are trying to avoid this press box right in the middle area here. So I made that press box be a reflective plane in ArrayCalc. And if I switch to that AP slot, press 1 equals reflect is what I've named it, and I can model this at 4K, it'll do a great job, especially once I do this. It'll do a fantastic job of missing my press box in the high frequency. But it also misses all of the seats off to the side. So this is one thing to check for in the 3D plot. I also have a slot that misses the press box up at the top level up here. So this one, because I'm pointing up into it, as soon as I avoid that, I'm also chopping off seats off to the side here. This is the kind of stuff we want to look for in our 3D plot, and sub to top alignment is no exception. Finlay, I see what you're saying. Unfortunately, with the way you guys set up your D80 IDs, you're just going to have to enter them all in manually. Sorry about that. It's an interesting thing to think about for the software team, though. Yeah. Yeah, it's another good point. Another reason for not having your array processing realizer so high is if you have to change temperature and humidity. Because if the air becomes less dense, array processing has to work harder to overcome air absorption. And if you're already at the top of your realizer, you'll be limiting how much you can change temperature and humidity. Yeah, great point.
Yeah, and these are good things to test out ahead of time as you're building your slots. You might move those temperature and humidity settings to the extremes that you might think that you might hit for early morning, afternoon, and evening, just to make sure that that realizer meter is going to stay within the boundaries, so that you can make adjustments ahead of time instead of having to scramble to do them on site as temperature and humidity is changing.
Mm-hmm. Now, Valerie asked a question to get back to the sub spacing thing. She's talking about left-right subs, of course, for those times when you can't do a horizontal subarray, like in a lot of theaters where there's just no area between the front row. So you end up having to make a couple of stacks left and right, which of course is totally doable. What I'm gonna do here is just kind of model it up really quick, but maybe they're further off stage. This is not to scale, but even in the case of stacks left and right, we still want to leave 2 feet between the stacks for the cardioid behavior to be effective. As soon as we start to butt these cabinets up right next to each other like this now just became an almost completely omnidirectional pair of stacks. So in this case, if this was the only amount of space I had, what I would actually do is reallocate those subs, and instead of 3 stacks of 2 per side, I would do 2 stacks of 3 subs per side and still maintain a minimum of a 2-foot gap between the stacks. Unfortunately, ArrayCalc does not predict this behavior very well because ArrayCalc is not taking into consideration the neighboring cabinets and how that's affecting the baffle and the path lengths between the front speakers and the rear speakers. So this is one of those things that you have to keep in the back of your mind and not trust ArrayCalc for, because ArrayCalc is free field prediction only, which means it's not taking into account any reflections or absorptions within the venue at all. So if you put your subs right next to each other, it'll still behave like they're on like they're cardioid, but in the real world, they're behaving more like omnidirectional subs. This also relates to a question we had about how ArrayCalc can predict max SPL without taking into account acoustic variables like reflections. And the reason is it can't really do it with the ultimate accuracy we would want if this was an installation and we really wanted to be absolutely certain. We would use a more complicated prediction tool like Ease for something like that. But for a mobile application, to get an idea of whether a given PA design will meet the SPL of a writer requirement, we can be accurate enough to tell that the system is going to work for that show. So yes, it would be more accurate if it took into consideration reflections, but as the question pointed out, we would then need to know the reflection and absorption coefficients of every surface, and now we're getting into a lot of time building an ArrayCalc model, and every user needing to understand those types of acoustic parameters, which as regular sound engineers, we're not acousticians, so we're not really built to do that, and it becomes diminishing returns very quickly. So hopefully that answers that question. Does ArrayCalc use the average multiple array sites in a system? If so, would it make sense to have extras at the bottom or at front of house as well? It's a great question, Chris. It does not currently average multiple positions, although I know that's a feature request that's already been submitted. I also have a feature request for R1 to log temperature and humidity over time. This would allow you to hang your PA on day 1, let your computer run overnight, come back the next day, and have an idea of the temperature and humidity swings that happen throughout the course of a 24-hour period. I think that would be helpful. But we're not currently averaging. Right now, you just have different displays for each array site in your system, and it's up to you to look at them and maybe deduce an average from all of your different readings. Good questions. Mm-hmm. Can you give some best practices to combat very long subarrays with the most outer subs causing delay issues with your full-on tops? Wow, it's a good one. Yeah, okay. All right, I can dig this. I'm going to switch to the whiteboard for this. New share. Whiteboard. Let me juggle my windows here a little bit. Yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts on this map. But in this case, let's see, clear all drawings. Let's say we've got a 180-foot wide barricade line. And all along this are subs. Let's do this. Each little arrow is a subwoofer all the way across. Tons and tons of subs. 96 SL subs just for fun. And of course, we see our delay times starting at 0 and moving out, I don't know, 40, 50 milliseconds out here. Meanwhile, we have some PA clusters. Like maybe there's a left, center, right, outfill, double outfill. So what do? Do you offset these in time to match the subs, and in which case the coverage overlaps don't work very well? Or do you let the outer subs and tops be out of time? I think that's the question that we have here. What I would suggest in this case is that we actually rehang our tops to better match our sub timing. So a center, an off-fill, an off-fill, and an off-fill. Sorry, I'm bad at drawing. So that way, our zero time in the middle, sorry, maybe middle's here. This is 10 milliseconds. So this guy gets 10 milliseconds. This is, I don't know, 20 milliseconds or something. Hypothetical numbers here. So this guy gets 20, 40 milliseconds, and this guy gets 40. So that all the delay times are going outward. And just by turning the outer mains cabinets, we've corrected for this geometry issue, and we've gotten good coverage out to the sides. Now, of course, me drawing this doesn't mean it's possible on a show site, and your mileage may vary. This is one of those hardships when we talk about mega concerts and then wanting all the subs ever created in the world. And maybe there's a debate here to go to flown subs in vertical arrays behind the mains so that the subs are delaying outwards with mains as well to keep those sources more coherent. It's a tough call. You know, it's like I like to say, live sound is the art of scientific compromise. So best of luck to you on that gig. All right, we got that question. Can I add a non-cardioid sub? Sure you can. Right now I have SL subs selected in my file. SL sub is a very well-behaved tight cardioid sub. It's actually somewhere between cardioid and hypercardioid. But I can select any other model of sub in here, including any omnidirectional sub made by Dmv, such as the B2 or the B22. So in the case of the B22, we see the same amount of energy on the back side as on the front side. This is an omnidirectional sub, and of course I can place these in a full sub array as well and add delay times to control the dispersion. But we see only slightly less output on the back side than the front, especially when we compare this to a very well-behaved cardioid sub. Absolutely. It just takes a little bit of understanding what model Dmv sub does what. Great. So we got some of these. What is the plus and minus on temperature and humidity for AP to work as intended?
I think the question's more like how much tolerance do you have above and below the actual temperature and humidity?
I see. That's a good question. You want to take it?
I mean, I think, I don't know if you've got a scientific answer to this, but I think some of it just kind of comes to your ears. You know, as you're listening and as temperature and humidity is changing, you know, you start to hear the point where maybe the mix is starting to get a little bit harsh. It might be time to take a look at your temperature and humidity and switch to that next slot. Generally, as a system tech, I'm looking ahead at what the temperature and humidity is doing and what those trends are looking at like, and constantly updating my slots so that as soon as that point in time comes, or I start to notice that, you know, the mix might not be sounding as great as it did 30 minutes ago, I've got that slot lined up and ready to go. But now with the new temperature humidity calculator available in R1, it makes it super easy to just grab that slider and kind of move that along the line to make your adjustments. But yeah, for me, I think it just kind of comes down to you know, what does the sound like? If if you're off by maybe a couple of degrees and it's still sounding great and nice and in the pocket, I'd say leave it alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think especially if it's a tour and you've been working all morning, don't kill yourself over chasing temperature and humidity every time it changes by 1% or 1 degree. Go for some big jumps between bands, if anything. Personally, here's how I look at it. The biggest influencer on air absorption is humidity. And almost always, in most of our concert environments, we're getting more humidity as the concert goes on longer. This means that there's more air molecules or more water molecules in the air, which allows sound to transfer better. The other thing that's happening throughout our concert is not just the PA is more effectively getting high frequencies in a longer distance because the air is becoming wetter, but we're becoming desensitized because we've been in front of a PA longer. So our short-term hearing is starting to be affected in an attenuation way. So I think it's totally natural for us as human beings, as our hearing starts to degrade from being in front of a PA, that the PA is carrying more high frequency further, and we just leave the thing alone. Personally. But your mileage may vary. And of course, you're doing a gig in Vegas or somewhere else in the desert, and you know, it's a totally different can of worms. Yeah. Does ArrayCalc model end fire arrays? I love this question, Roy. You're on fire today. This is great. Okay, it does. A lot of people think that ArrayCalc does not do end fire arrays, but it fully does. It just doesn't do it automatically for you. So check this out. I'm going to leave SL subs 4 per side, basically. I'm going to leave this just as is, and I'm going to leave it as symmetrical. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to manually, I'm going to make a left-right end fire array that goes down the side of the stage. Oops. And I'm going to stagger them. Let's say minus 16 feet, minus 12 feet, minus 6 feet. So I've placed these subs approximately, sorry, my math is very bad. Minus 4, minus 12, minus 4, 8. I'm really bad at math today, guys. And minus 12, 4 feet apart. 4 feet is a quarter wavelength at 80-ish hertz. So they're all 4 feet apart.
Can you show us your screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Matt. I forgot. I forgot about my sound effects. All right.
Yeah,
so,
it gets tough when you got 10 monitors to work with.
It's true. Yeah, I have a command center here. All right, so I have 4 subs per side. They're stacked with a grill distance of 4 feet offset, so 4 feet from grill to grill. And I know that, as we talked about earlier, 1 millisecond is roughly equivalent to 1 foot of delay time. So that means I could start just tapping in some numbers here. My furthest rear sub is going to be at 0 milliseconds. Then I'm going to take this one to approximately 4, the next one to approximately 8 milliseconds, and the next one to approximately 12 milliseconds. And sure enough, look at all of that forward firing energy. So now we have a 4 deep row of cardioid subs working in an end fire. Totally doable. Now, it's up to you a little bit to mess around with these delay times. And in fact, it does still kind of work. What if I do this? 0 milliseconds and apply delay, and it still takes into account the position of my subs and automatically enters times. I just realized that. That's great. So yes, I just have to manually position the subs, and then I can still hit apply delay, and it will still work it out, assuming that my end fire array is pointing towards the right in ArrayCalc. Yeah. And of course, I could do this with omnidirectional subs as well. So I could use this to find delay times for any type of subwoofer, even if it's not a Dmv sub. The big secret here is that these delay times, they are not model specific. It works on any type of subwoofer, and it's just basic physics math based on the acoustic center of different transducer cabinets. That's it. Easy peasy. We're getting funny text messages from people in this chat. That's great. You got another question, Matt?